At my sister's wedding rehearsal dinner, she thought it would be funny to introduce me to her wealthy new-in-laws by saying, "This is my stepsister Tessa. She is just a nurse. Do not ask her about business or investments tonight, folks. Someone has to change the bedpans right." She laughed loudly into the microphone. My biological father burst out laughing from the head table. My stepmother smirked. They all thought I was the ultimate loser, until the groom's billionaire father stood up and stared at me. "Wait," he said, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "You are the girl who—" His next words froze the entire room. "My name is Tessa. I am 33 years old, and I have spent my entire life letting my blended family treat me like the dirt on their designer shoes." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who underestimated your worth. The sharp, distinct sound of a silver spoon clinking against a crystal champagne flute cut through the low hum of conversation. The noise echoed across the grand ballroom of the Grand Marquis Hotel. It was a luxury five-star venue reserved for only the most elite events in the city. The room was a breathtaking display of staggering wealth. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over 95 carefully selected guests. The tables were draped in heavy white silk and adorned with towering floral centerpieces of white roses and imported orchids. Waiters in crisp black uniforms moved silently among the guests, pouring vintage champagne and clearing plates of lobster thermidor. At the center of it all stood Chelsea, my 29-year-old stepsister. She looked like she had stepped off the cover of an expensive bridal magazine. She was wearing a custom silk rehearsal dress that probably cost more than some people's cars. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and a diamond necklace sparkled brilliantly at her throat. She held her champagne flute high, a bright, confident smile plastered across her face. This was her night. This was her stage. She was marrying into the Maxwell family, one of the wealthiest and most influential venture capital families in the state. She was finally getting the crown she truly believed she deserved. I sat at table number 10. It was the very last table tucked away in the darkest corner of the ballroom near the swinging kitchen doors. My dining companions were a deaf great-uncle and three of the groom's awkward college fraternity brothers who had spent the entire evening completely ignoring me. I was wearing a simple navy blue dress I had bought off the rack years ago. My hair was pulled back into a neat, practical bun. I did not fit in with the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, and Chelsea had made sure I knew it. Placing me at table 10 was a deliberate message to tell me I did not belong with them. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Chelsea began speaking softly into the microphone, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Harrison and I are so incredibly blessed to be surrounded by people who love and support us." She turned to look at Harrison, the groom who was smiling back at her with absolute devotion. He was a good man, completely blind to the toxic reality of the family he was marrying into. Chelsea then turned her gaze to the head table where my biological father William and my stepmother Catherine sat beaming with pride. "Thank you to my amazing parents," she continued. "You have given me everything. You taught me the value of hard work, ambition, and success." The guests offered a polite round of applause. My father raised his glass to her, his chest puffed out. My stepmother wiped a fake tear from her eye. I watched the performance with a completely neutral expression, sipping my sparkling water. I knew my family well enough to know that a compliment for Chelsea usually came at a direct cost to me. It had been this way since we were children. Whenever Chelsea needed to feel superior, I was the stepping stone she used to elevate herself. I braced my body against the chair, waiting for the inevitable drop. Chelsea scanned the room, her eyes sweeping over the elite crowd of venture capitalists, tech founders, and real estate developers. Then her gaze locked onto my dark corner by the kitchen doors. Her smile sharpened into a cruel smirk. "And of course I have to acknowledge my extended family," she said, her voice taking on a teasing, theatrical tone. "Way back there in the dark is my stepsister Tessa. Stand up, Tessa, give everyone a wave." I did not stand. I simply sat perfectly still, looking back at her. Chelsea let out a bright, ringing laugh. "Do not be shy," she mocked into the microphone. "I just want to give a fair warning to all of Harrison's wonderful, brilliant business partners here tonight. If you end up mingling at the open bar later, do not bother asking Tessa about business strategies or stock portfolios or global investments." The ballroom grew dangerously quiet. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Chelsea leaned closer to the microphone, her eyes locked onto mine. "She is just a nurse," she said. She paused, letting the word nurse hang in the air like a dirty secret, something to be ashamed of in this room full of millionaires. "But hey, someone has to empty the bedpans and clean up the messes, right? Let us raise a glass to the bedpan cleaners of the world." The insult landed exactly as she intended. A few of the fraternity brothers at my table snickered awkwardly into their napkins, trying to hide their amusement. From the head table, my biological father let out a booming, heavy laugh. It was a sound I recognized from my childhood, a sound reserved for whenever I failed or fell short of his impossible standards. He clearly found the public humiliation of his own biological daughter completely hilarious. My stepmother Catherine smiled warmly and nodded, leaning over to whisper something definitely derogatory to the wealthy guest seated next to her. The rest of the room offered a scattered, uncomfortable chuckle. These were polite, high society people, unsure of how to react to such a blatant public shaming, but unwilling to disrupt the bride on her special night. I felt 95 pairs of eyes turn to look at me sitting alone in my cheap navy dress next to the kitchen doors. I could feel the heavy weight of pity radiating from the strangers in the room. They looked at me and saw a poor, unsuccessful woman being rightfully put in her place by her glamorous, wealthy stepsister. They expected me to shrink down into my chair. They expected me to cry and run out of the ballroom in total shame, leaving them to enjoy their luxurious dinner in peace. That is exactly what the old Tessa would have done years ago. The old Tessa would have let them crush her spirit entirely and apologize for ruining the mood. I had spent decades swallowing my pride just to keep the peace in a family that actively enjoyed tearing me apart. But as I sat there gripping the smooth crystal stem of my water glass, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, calculating calm wash over my entire body. I did not flinch. I did not look away from Chelsea. I just kept my eyes locked on hers, letting the silence stretch. I knew the truth about my life. I knew the countless hours I spent in the trauma ward, saving lives and doing work that actually mattered. More importantly, I knew the massive secret I had been hiding from them for the past 10 years. They had no idea who I really was. They had no idea the kind of power I held outside of this toxic family dynamic. And they had absolutely no idea that their cruel little joke was about to blow up in their faces in the most spectacular way possible. William's laughter continued to echo against the vaulted ceilings of the ballroom. I watched the way his shoulders shook with genuine amusement as he leaned back in his chair, holding his champagne flute. This was the man who was supposed to protect me. After my biological mother passed away, he had quickly married Catherine, bringing Chelsea into our home and instantly demoting me to a second-class citizen in my own house. For decades, that booming, heavy laugh had been a psychological weapon used to belittle my grades, my clothes, and my life choices. I used to crave his approval, like oxygen. I used to bend over backwards, picking up extra shifts at the hospital, and handing over my meager savings just to earn a single nod of acknowledgement from him. Not tonight. At the head table, Catherine leaned gracefully toward the wealthy socialite on her left, shielding her mouth with a manicured hand. I could not hear the exact words she whispered, but I could read her body language perfectly. She was playing her favorite role of the long-suffering stepmother, burdened by a deeply disappointing and embarrassing stepdaughter. The socialite offered a tight, sympathetic smile and glanced in my direction with thinly veiled disgust. The three fraternity brothers sitting at my table shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them cleared his throat loudly and looked down at his lobster thermidor, completely refusing to make eye contact with me. My great-uncle adjusted his hearing aid, oblivious to the public execution happening right in front of him. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water. The cold liquid grounded me, keeping my heart rate perfectly steady. I felt the familiar weight of the solid platinum credit card sitting securely in my small clutch purse resting on my lap. That small piece of plastic represented years of relentless grind, late nights in research laboratories, and patent applications that my family knew absolutely nothing about. They looked at me and saw a woman who lived in a modest apartment and wore standard-issue hospital scrubs. They had no concept of the massive empire I had built, while they were busy maxing out high-interest credit cards to maintain their fake country club lifestyle. Chelsea remained standing at the head table waiting for the laughter to die down so she could deliver her next punchline. She adjusted her diamond necklace, basking in the bright spotlight. She truly believed she had won the ultimate victory. She believed she had successfully established the hierarchy for her wealthy new in-laws, proving once and for all that she was the glamorous, successful daughter, while I was the pathetic charity case allowed to attend only out of pity. But as I watched her preen for the crowd, I felt a profound sense of peace. I did not feel humiliated. I felt entirely liberated. For my entire life, my role in this family was strictly defined by their abuse. I was the designated scapegoat, designed to absorb their personal failures and highlight their manufactured successes. When Chelsea failed out of her prestigious private college, my parents blamed my negative energy for distracting her. When my father made terrible investment choices that cost them thousands, Catherine blamed the cost of my basic high school necessities. They had systematically trained me to believe I was a burden, a useless weight dragging them down. Tonight, the chains of that psychological prison shattered completely. Looking at them now, I did not see powerful authority figures. I saw pathetic, transparent bullies. I saw a fragile house of cards waiting for a single gust of wind to collapse. I knew the truth about William and Catherine. I knew their real estate business was secretly drowning in massive debt. They were banking their entire survival on this wedding. They desperately needed the grooms, Father Jonathan Maxwell, to bail them out with a massive corporate loan. They were drowning people putting on a glittering theatrical performance, with my humiliation serving as the opening act. I set my glass down on the white silk tablecloth. The crystal made a soft, solid thud. The time for shrinking was over. I was no longer the frightened teenager they could lock in a basement bedroom. I was no longer the exhausted young woman they could bully into handing over her paycheck. I was the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Medical Innovations. I held medical patents that revolutionized trauma care globally. The very venture capital firm my family was currently trying to impress had been leaving desperate voicemails with my chief financial officer for 8 solid months, begging for just a 10-minute introductory meeting with me. The irony was so delicious, it almost tasted sweet. Chelsea tapped her microphone again, preparing to twist the knife further. I kept my posture perfectly straight. I did not cross my arms defensively. I did not look down at my lap. I met her triumphant gaze with a look of absolute unbothered serenity. That reaction alone caused her bright smile to falter for a fraction of a second. She expected me to break down in tears. She expected me to rush out of the double doors behind me and hide in the bathroom in total shame. My lack of visible trauma confused her. She opened her mouth to speak again, her eyes narrowing with malicious intent, ready to double down on her cruelty. I let my eyes drift from Chelsea to the groom Harrison. He looked incredibly uncomfortable. His kind eyes darted between his bride and my dark corner of the room. He clearly did not understand why his future wife was acting with such unprovoked cruelty toward her own flesh and blood. Harrison was a genuinely good guy, deeply naive and entirely manipulated by Chelsea's fake sweet persona. He had treated me with nothing but basic human respect since the day we met, which of course only made Chelsea hate me more. She could not stand anyone showing me basic kindness. Then my gaze moved to the man sitting next to Harrison, Jonathan Maxwell, the billionaire patriarch, the man whose money my father desperately needed to avoid complete financial ruin. Jonathan had been quietly cutting his steak when Chelsea started her vile speech. Now he was sitting perfectly still. The polite society smile had completely vanished from his face. He was not looking at Chelsea. He was staring directly past the towering white floral arrangements straight at me. Jonathan Maxwell did not just look at me. He stared with an intensity that completely paralyzed the entire ballroom. The heavy mahogany chair scraped loudly against the polished marble floor as he pushed himself backward. He stood up slowly to his full height. He was a tall, imposing man who radiated absolute authority. When the patriarch of Maxwell Ventures moved, the financial world paid attention. Right now, every single one of those 95 elite guests was paying attention to him. Chelsea was caught completely off guard. She had her mouth open, ready to deliver whatever toxic punchline she had prepared to finish my public execution. Her manicured fingers tightened around the microphone. For a brief second, a look of total confusion flashed across her perfectly contoured face. She quickly forced a bright artificial smile, assuming her future father-in-law was standing up to take over the floor. She thought he was rising to offer a toast to her beauty and grace to officially welcome her into his billionaire family. "Jonathan! Jonathan!" she cooed into the microphone, her voice dripping with syrupy sweetness. "Did you want to say a few words to our lovely guests?" Jonathan completely ignored her. He did not even glance in her direction. It was as if the glowing bride standing just 3 feet away from him simply did not exist. The slight dismissal was so profound that a collective gasp rippled through the front tables. Chelsea stood frozen on the stage, her artificial smile cracking at the edges. Her moment of absolute triumph was being hijacked, and she had no idea how to stop it. My biological father, William, instantly stopped his booming laughter. I watched the realization hit him that something was terribly wrong. His chest deflated and his posture went rigid. He desperately needed Jonathan Maxwell to approve a massive corporate bailout for his failing real estate firm. Seeing the billionaire ignore his golden child daughter sent a visible wave of panic crashing over his face. He quickly reached over and grabbed Catherine's arm. My stepmother dropped her smug smirk immediately. She sat up straight, her eyes darting between Jonathan and me. I could practically hear the gears turning in her manipulative mind. She probably assumed Jonathan was deeply offended by my presence. She likely thought he was furious that a lowly hospital worker was breathing the same air as his elite venture capital partners. Jonathan stepped away from the head table. He bypassed his son Harrison, who was watching his father with genuine bewilderment. He bypassed the towering floral arrangements and the iced champagne buckets. He began walking slowly down the center aisle of the ballroom. The atmosphere in the room shifted from polite high society discomfort to sheer breathless tension. Not a single piece of silver touched a china plate. The waiters in their crisp black uniforms stopped moving entirely, holding their serving trays perfectly still. The silence was so absolute that the only sound in the massive venue was the steady rhythmic click of Jonathan's expensive leather shoes against the marble floor. The 3 fraternity brothers sitting at my table suddenly sat up completely straight. They looked absolutely terrified, realizing that the most powerful man in the city was marching directly toward our dark corner by the kitchen doors. My deaf great-uncle looked around, bewildered by the sudden quiet, but no one moved to explain it to him. I did not break eye contact with Jonathan. I kept my posture perfectly straight, resting my hands calmly in my lap over my clutch purse. My heart beat with a steady, even rhythm. I knew exactly who he was, and I knew exactly why his firm was desperate. Maxwell Ventures was bleeding money in their healthcare portfolio. They had made terrible investments in outdated medical technology, and their board of directors was demanding a miracle. My company, Vanguard Medical Innovations, was that miracle. My chief financial officer had been ignoring their frantic calls for 8 solid months, letting them sweat while we prepared to dominate the market globally. But as Jonathan drew closer, I saw something else in his face. This was not just a corporate realization. This was not just a billionaire recognizing a rival chief executive officer across a crowded room. This was deeply personal. He stopped walking when he was just 10 feet away from table 10. The polished, confident mask of the ruthless venture capitalist completely vanished from his face. The healthy color drained entirely from his cheeks, leaving him looking almost pale. His breathing became shallow and uneven. He stared at me as if he were looking at a ghost, as if a phantom had materialized in the middle of his son's rehearsal dinner. William suddenly pushed his chair back and stood up, attempting to run damage control. Jonathan, my father called out, his voice thick with desperate groveling panic. I am so sorry. Tessa is just leaving. She knows she does not belong here. We will have her escorted out immediately, so we can continue celebrating Chelsea. Jonathan raised his right hand in a sharp, commanding gesture, silencing my father instantly. William snapped his mouth shut, dropping back into his chair, as if he had been struck. Jonathan took one final step toward my table. The distance between us closed. I saw his eyes widen in absolute profound awe. His jaw trembled slightly before he managed to open his mouth. He raised his hand slowly, pointing his index finger directly at me. The entire room held its collective breath, waiting for the billionaire to speak. Wait! Jonathan said, his voice raw and echoing clearly through the silent ballroom. You are the girl who saved his wife. Before Jonathan Maxwell could finish that sentence, my mind violently snapped back to a moment exactly 6 months prior. The sharp contrast between this silent, luxurious ballroom and the screaming chaos of the trauma ward was jarring. 6 months ago, I was not wearing a navy dress. I was covered in sweat and wearing standard-issue blue scrubs. Monitors blared constantly. The smell of bleach and metallic copper filled my nose. I had just spent 3 grueling hours helping to stabilize a victim from a massive highway pileup. My muscles ached, and my adrenaline was slowly crashing. I stood at the central nurses' station, typing furiously into an electronic chart, trying to update the patient's file before the next ambulance arrived. Suddenly, the heavy automatic doors of the emergency room slid open. My biological father, William, and my stepmother, Catherine, marched right past the triage desk. They looked completely absurd and entirely out of place. William wore a tailored golf polo and expensive slacks. Catherine wore a beige cashmere sweater with designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly styled hair. They walked through the active trauma ward like they owned the building, stepping around exhausted medical staff and groaning patients with looks of sheer disgust on their faces. Tessa, we need to speak with you right now, William barked. He marched up to the nurse's station and slapped a thick manila folder directly over my computer keyboard. I stopped typing and stared at him. I am in the middle of a shift, William. You cannot be back here. This is a restricted medical zone. Do not use that disrespectful tone with your father, Catherine snapped. She pulled her cashmere sweater tighter around her shoulders, looking at a passing gurney with visible horror. We would not have to come to this filthy place if you actually answered your phone when we called. You are impossible to reach. I pushed the manila folder off my keyboard. I work in an emergency room, Catherine. I do not check my phone while I am stopping people from bleeding to death. What do you want? William opened the folder and shoved a stack of financial documents toward me. Chelsea is finalizing her wedding venue. The costs have slightly exceeded the initial projections. We need a secondary signature on this bridge loan to secure the reservations and pay the event planners. I looked down at the paperwork. The bold print at the top indicated a high-risk private loan. I scanned the numbers. The principal amount was $150,000. The interest rate was absolutely predatory. I looked back up at the man who had abandoned me when I was 16 years old. You want me to co-sign a $150,000 loan for Chelsea's wedding? It was not a question. It was a statement of absolute disbelief. It is just a formality, William said, waving his hand dismissively as if he were asking me to borrow a pen. My real estate assets are tied up in escrow right now. With your steady nursing income and zero debt, the bank just needs a reliable co-signer to push the funds through. You will not pay a single dime. Family sacrifices for family, Tessa. It is your familial duty to help your sister on the most important day of her life. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. She is not my sister. And you stopped being family the day you moved Catherine into our house and stopped paying my high school tuition so you could buy Chelsea a new sports car. I am not co-signing a loan for a party. Catherine let out a sharp, cruel laugh. It echoed loudly over the beeping medical monitors. Oh, please. Are you still crying about ancient history? Look at yourself, Tessa. You are 33 years old working graveyard shifts in a disgusting hospital. You smell like iodine and cheap soap. You live in a tiny, depressing apartment. You have absolutely no ambition. You have no husband and no future. The least you can do is help Chelsea secure her dream life, since you clearly threw yours away. We need this money for the imported white orchids and the custom ice sculptures. Catherine continued, her voice dripping with condescension. Chelsea deserves a champagne fountain. You cannot expect her to compromise her vision just because you lack the capacity to understand luxury. I stood perfectly still. The irony of her insults was suffocating, but I kept my face entirely blank. They looked at me and saw a tired, broke nurse. They saw a scapegoat they could manipulate. They did not see the chief executive officer. They did not see the multimillionaire. William tapped the paper angrily, his face turning red. I provided a roof over your head for 16 years. I fed you. You owe me this. Chelsea is marrying into the Maxwell family. This wedding is an investment in all our futures. Once the Maxwells see our social standing, my real estate firm will secure financial backing for the next decade. This loan is a minor stepping stone. Stop being a selfish, bitter spinster and sign the document. You abandoned me when I was a teenager, William, I said, my voice dangerously low. You changed the locks on the front door because Catherine did not want a reminder of your first marriage ruining her perfect new aesthetic. I worked 3 jobs and slept on friends' couches to put myself through nursing school while you paid for Chelsea's luxury vacations to Europe. I owe you absolutely nothing. You always were a massive disappointment, William snarled, leaning over the counter to intimidate me. I told Catherine it was a mistake coming here to ask a failure for help. You do not understand how the real world works. You do not understand high-level business or high-level investments. You are going to be changing bedpans until you are 65 years old because you have no vision. Catherine narrowed her eyes at me with pure venom. You are just jealous. You are jealous that Chelsea is beautiful and successful and marrying a wealthy man while you die alone in your ugly little scrubs. You are a complete embarrassment to this family. Just sign the papers and do something useful with your pathetic life for once. I looked at the pen Catherine shoved across the counter toward me. It was a heavy, gold-plated pen that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She tapped her perfectly manicured fingernail against the signature line on the loan document. William suddenly shifted his strategy. Seeing that his aggressive intimidation was failing, he immediately switched to playing the victim. He let out a long, dramatic sigh and rubbed his temples, acting as though I was breaking his heart. Tessa, why do you always have to make everything so incredibly difficult? He asked, his voice softening into a patronizing whine. You have this completely distorted memory of your childhood. You always play the victim. I did not abandon you. I gave you the space you needed to figure out your own life. You were a rebellious teenager, and I was trying to teach you independence. We are a family, and families operate as a team. Chelsea is a team player. Catherine is a team player. You are the only one sitting on the bench holding a grudge over imaginary slights. I stared at him, letting his toxic gaslighting wash over me without absorbing a single drop of it. It was fascinating to watch him rewrite our entire history right in front of my eyes. He genuinely wanted me to believe that locking me out of the house at 16 was a noble parenting strategy designed to build character. He wanted me to believe that choosing his new stepdaughter over his biological child was somehow an act of tough love. If we are such a tight-knit team, William, I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, then surely the team can manage to pay for their own imported white orchids without dragging the bench warmer into massive financial debt. His face instantly hardened, dropping the concerned father act entirely. This is not a joke, Tessa. You are going to sign this document right now. You owe us. You owe me for the food you ate and the clothes you wore for 16 years. I am calling in that debt today. If you do not sign this bridge loan, the caterers are going to cancel. The venue will release the date. The entire wedding will be ruined, and it will be entirely your fault. Do you really want that on your conscience? Do you want to be the reason your sister loses the happiest day of her life? She is not my sister, I repeated smoothly, and her wedding is not my responsibility. You are running a failing real estate firm, William. I can see the panic in your eyes. You are not just paying for a wedding. You are using this marriage to secure a financial lifeline from the Maxwell family, Because your own business is bleeding cash. You want me to anchor myself to your sinking ship. My answer is no, I will not sign it. Now get out of my emergency room before I call hospital security to escort you both off the premises. The absolute finality of my rejection hung in the sterile hospital air. William stood completely frozen. He was not used to anyone telling him no. He was used to people cowering, yielding, and handing him whatever he demanded. The realization that he had absolutely zero power over me finally struck him. Catherine, however, did not freeze. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged fury. The polite high society facade shattered, completely exposing the vicious, volatile bully underneath. "You ungrateful little brat!" she hissed, her voice vibrating with venom. "How dare you speak to your father that way? How dare you speak to me that way? We came down to this miserable hospital to give you a chance to finally be part of something meaningful. We gave you a chance to contribute to this family and prove you are not completely useless. But you are exactly what I always said you were. You are a selfish, ambitionless disappointment." Catherine reached out and grabbed a large paper cup of scalding hot coffee, sitting on the edge of the nurse's station. One of the attending physicians had just placed it there moments ago. With a swift, violent motion, she swiped her arm across the counter. She did not just knock the cup over. She deliberately hurled the boiling liquid directly across my workspace. The dark hot coffee splashed across the counter, dripping down the sides of the desk and pooling all over my printed charting paperwork. The liquid narrowly missed my scrub top, but splashed onto my shoes. "Oops!" Catherine sneered, a wicked, malicious smile spreading across her lips. My hand slipped. "Good luck cleaning up that mess, nurse. It seems cleaning up is the only thing you are actually qualified to do." She turned on her designer heels, grabbing William's arm. "Come on, William," she commanded loudly. "We are wasting our time breathing the same air as this failure. We will find another way to fund the wedding. Let her rot in this depressing hospital. She will never amount to anything anyway." William gave me one last look of sheer disgust before turning his back on me completely. They marched back toward the sliding emergency room doors, walking with the same arrogant entitlement they had arrived with. They left a trail of toxic energy in their wake, completely ignoring the stares of the nurses and doctors who had witnessed the entire chaotic exchange. I stood behind the counter looking down at the ruined paperwork. The dark coffee was rapidly soaking into the patient charts, staining the crisp white paper brown. The heat radiated up from the spill, warming the air between us. One of the younger nurses rushed over, carrying a thick stack of paper towels. Her eyes were wide with shock and sympathy. "Oh my goodness, Tessa," she gasped. "I am so sorry. Should I call security? I cannot believe they just did that. Are you burned? Did any of that hit you?" I raised my hand calmly, stopping her frantic movements. "I am perfectly fine, Sarah. No harm done." I took the paper towels from her hands and began methodically wiping down the counter. I moved with slow, deliberate precision. I did not huff in frustration. I did not cry. My hands did not shake. The scalding coffee was just a minor inconvenience, much like William and Catherine themselves. They thought they had won this interaction. They thought leaving me with a mess to clean up was the ultimate insult, proving my lowly status in the world. They believed they had successfully reminded me of my place. They walked out of those hospital doors fully convinced that I was crying over my ruined charts, nursing a broken heart over their rejection. They were so incredibly blind. I tossed the soaked paper towels into the waste bin and smoothly reprinted the patient charts from the computer terminal. The mess was completely erased in less than 2 minutes. I felt absolutely nothing but cold, sharp clarity. Their desperate, aggressive behavior only confirmed what I already knew. They were financially cornered and morally bankrupt. They thought they could break me with spilled coffee and harsh words, but they had no idea who they were actually messing with. They had no idea that I held the power to destroy their entire world. I tossed the ruined paper towels into the biohazard bin and calmly signed out of the hospital computer terminal. The charge nurse gave me a sympathetic nod, offering to cover my station while I took my scheduled 30-minute break. I thanked her and walked away from the glaring fluorescent lights and the chaotic symphony of beeping heart monitors. I made my way down the long, quiet corridor toward the staff locker room. My footsteps echoed softly against the linoleum floor. The sticky residue of the spilled coffee clung to my practical white sneakers, but I barely registered the discomfort. My mind was operating with razor-sharp precision. The locker room was completely empty and smelled faintly of rubbing alcohol and sterile laundry detergent. I walked over to locker number 42 and pulled the metal handle. The door creaked open, revealing my cheap winter coat and a faded canvas tote bag. Hidden discreetly behind my spare scrubs was a sleek, encrypted smartphone. It was a highly classified device that did not exist on the commercial market, specially issued to me by my corporate security team. I picked up the heavy device and watched the screen light up with an incoming call on the secure line. I tapped the screen and lifted the phone to my ear. "Good evening, Chief Executive Officer Caldwell," a crisp, professional voice said. It was Benjamin, the executive vice president of my company. "Good evening, Benjamin," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level as I unlaced my coffee-stained shoes. "I apologize for interrupting your hospital shift," Tessa, Benjamin continued. "But we just received the final quarterly valuation reports from the accounting department. I knew you would want to hear the exact numbers before the executive board meeting on Monday morning." "Go ahead," I said, slipping my feet into a clean pair of backup sneakers. Vanguard Medical Innovations has officially surpassed the $120 million valuation mark, Benjamin announced, his voice thick with undeniable pride. The European medical markets have fully adopted the Vanguard negative pressure wound vacuum. Our global distribution numbers are up 22% this quarter alone. The new manufacturing facilities in Germany are operating at maximum capacity to meet the overwhelming demand. $120 million. I closed my eyes and let the massive number wash over me. 10 years ago, I was a 23-year-old nurse, eating instant noodles in a freezing studio apartment, desperately trying to pay off my student loans. I spent my nights sketching medical blueprints at a cheap folding table. Working in the trauma ward, I had noticed a massive fatal flaw in how severe open wounds were healing. The existing vacuum systems on the market were incredibly bulky, highly inefficient, and terribly prone to causing secondary bacterial infections. I knew I could design something vastly superior. I took a massive, terrifying gamble and maxed out 3 separate credit cards to build the first working prototype of the Vanguard vacuum. I pitched my invention to a dozen skeptical investors who laughed me right out of their glass boardrooms simply because I was a young nurse in cheap clothes. They arrogantly told me to leave the medical engineering to the men in the laboratory. I absolutely refused to quit. I finally found one independent backer who took a chance on my blueprints. Within 2 years, the Vanguard device revolutionized the industry and became the golden standard in trauma centers across the entire country. "Congratulations to the team, Benjamin," I said, pulling my thoughts back to the present moment. The European expansion was a massive undertaking. "Please ensure the development team receives their quarterly performance bonuses by Friday afternoon." "Will do," Tessa, Benjamin replied. He paused for a moment, the sound of keyboard clicking echoing over the line. "You know, the board of directors still finds it highly amusing that the chief executive officer of a $120 million medical empire still works graveyard shifts at a local hospital. They cannot fathom why you still put on those scrubs every week." "They do not need to understand it," I said, leaning back against the cool metal of the lockers. "I did not build Vanguard just to sit in a glass tower and look at profit margins on a spreadsheet. I built this company to save lives. Working one 12-hour trauma shift a week keeps my feet firmly on the ground. It forces me to look the patients in the eye. It reminds me exactly why we do what we do. My own hospital uses my invention in Trauma Bay 4. Every single time I watch a trauma surgeon apply my vacuum device to a critical patient and watch their bleeding instantly stabilize, I know every single sacrifice I made was worth it. Your unparalleled dedication to patient care is exactly why Vanguard is dominating the global market," Benjamin noted respectfully. "By the way, did your family ever find out about the company? The corporate media department has been working overtime keeping your name and photograph out of the major financial publications, just as you strictly requested." My family has absolutely no idea, I said, staring at the cheap gray interior of my locker. They still think I am a destitute, ambitionless nurse living paycheck to paycheck. They think I am a massive disappointment. I prefer to keep it exactly that way. The truth was that keeping my immense wealth a total secret was the ultimate camouflage. If William and Catherine knew I was a multimillionaire, they would have descended upon me like bloodthirsty vultures a decade ago. They would have legally harassed me, demanded I fund their lavish fake lifestyle, paid off their underwater real estate mortgages, and bankrolled Chelsea's luxury existence. By hiding my wealth, I protected my peace and my company. I let them believe their own toxic narrative because it kept them at a safe, manageable distance. They were so blinded by their own extreme arrogance and superficial judgments that they never bothered to look deeper into my life. They saw the humble scrubs and immediately dismissed me as a failure. Benjamin chuckled softly over the secure line. Well, your camouflage is working flawlessly, Tessa. You are practically a ghost in the corporate financial world. But we have a rapidly developing situation regarding our domestic acquisition strategy that requires your immediate attention. Is this about the upcoming board meeting? I asked, crossing my arms over my chest. Partially, Benjamin said, but it mainly concerns our aggressive expansion into the venture capital sector. You need to speak with our chief financial officer right away. She has been fielding some very aggressive and desperate inquiries from a major firm, and she needs your direct authorization on how to proceed. I will call her right now, I said, pushing myself away from the lockers. Thank you, Benjamin. Have a good night. I ended the call with Benjamin and immediately dialed the direct extension for my chief financial officer. The encrypted line clicked twice before she answered. Monica was the sharpest financial mind on the Eastern Seaboard. She was a ruthless negotiator who treated corporate acquisitions like blood sport, and she was fiercely loyal to Vanguard Medical. Good evening, Tessa, Monica said. Her voice crackled with a distinct layer of intense adrenaline. I assume Benjamin briefed you on the European distribution numbers, but we have an entirely different situation developing right here at home. He mentioned a venture capital firm was making aggressive inquiries, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured. I leaned against the cold metal door of my locker, staring at the fluorescent light flickering slightly above my head. Who is it? Maxwell Ventures, Monica stated. The name echoed in the small, sterile locker room. I stood completely still. Jonathan Maxwell's firm. The very same billionaire family my stepsister Chelsea was currently preparing to marry into. The same family my biological father William viewed as his ultimate financial salvation. Tell me everything, I commanded. Jonathan Maxwell is panicking, Monica explained rapidly. His firm made some incredibly arrogant and reckless bets over the past 3 years. They dumped nearly $500 million into a robotic surgery startup that just completely imploded under regulatory investigations. They also backed a string of digital health clinics that are currently bleeding cash. Their entire healthcare portfolio is a massive toxic liability. The shareholders are threatening a hostile takeover, and the board of directors is demanding Jonathan's head on a silver platter. He desperately needs a highly profitable, pristine asset to absorb his losses and balance his books before their next quarterly earnings report. And he wants Vanguard, I said, connecting the dots instantly. He does not just want Vanguard, Tessa. He needs Vanguard to survive, Monica corrected with a sharp laugh. Jonathan Maxwell himself has called my private office line 4 times today. He is bypassing his own acquisition team to handle this personally. He is practically begging for a buyout or a merger. He offered to fly his private jet anywhere in the world just to get 10 minutes in a room with you. He is offering premium market rates, but I can smell the sheer desperation through the phone. He is drowning. I closed my eyes and let a cold, sharp smile touch my lips. The cosmic irony of the entire situation was absolutely staggering. Just minutes ago, William and Catherine had stood in my emergency room mocking my modest scrubs in my tiny apartment. They had demanded I chain myself to a predatory loan to fund a lavish wedding, just so they could impress the Maxwell family. William believed Jonathan Maxwell was an invincible titan of industry. William believed that marrying Chelsea off to Harish and Maxwell would guarantee his failing real estate firm a massive corporate bailout. William was sacrificing his own biological daughter to buy favor with a billionaire who was secretly begging that same daughter for corporate salvation. My father was desperately trying to leech off the Maxwell family wealth, having absolutely no idea that the Maxwell family was desperately trying to leech off my medical empire. They were all just a pathetic circle of parasites feeding on each other to maintain a flimsy illusion of high society success. And I was the apex predator, standing quietly at the very top of the food chain holding the keys to the entire kingdom. Tessa, Monica asked, breaking through my silence. How do you want to play this? Should I schedule a preliminary digital meeting? We could acquire their failing tech assets for pennies on the dollar and completely absorb their market share. Jonathan is desperate enough to sign whatever terms we dictate. No, I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling calm. Deny the meeting. Monica paused, clearly surprised. Deny the meeting completely. Do not just deny it, I instructed. Humiliate them. I want you to route all future communications from Jonathan Maxwell directly to a junior intern. Tell the intern to reply with generic automated responses saying our executive calendar is fully booked for the foreseeable future. Do not answer his personal phone calls. Let them go straight to voicemail. You want to ghost a billionaire? Monica asked, a hint of wicked amusement creeping back into her voice. I want him to panic, I clarified. When a powerful man like Jonathan Maxwell feels cornered, he makes impulsive, emotional decisions. We are not going to throw him a life preserver while he still has the strength to negotiate. We are going to let him sink a little deeper. We are going to let Maxwell sweat. Let his board of directors push him to the absolute brink of professional ruin. When his stock valuation hits rock bottom, we will step in and buy his entire firm for a fraction of its worth. But until then, you give him absolutely nothing. Understood. Chief Executive Officer Monica said, her tone shifting to strict professionalism. I will block his calendar requests and forward his emails to the spam folder. We will let them bleed until you give the order to strike. Thank you, Monica. Enjoy your weekend, I said. I terminated the secure connection and powered down the encrypted device. I carefully tucked the phone back into my canvas tote bag, burying it beneath a spare set of hospital scrubs. I closed the metal locker and spun the combination dial, locking my secret empire safely away. I took a deep breath of the sterile hospital air. The scent of rubbing alcohol and bleached linens no longer felt like the smell of a grueling working-class job. It felt like the scent of absolute, untouchable power. William and Catherine had called me a selfish, ambitionless disappointment. They had poured scalding coffee over my paperwork to remind me of my lowly place in their world. They truly believed I was a pathetic stepping stone for Chelsea's glamorous new life. They had absolutely no idea that I held the strings to the entire city's healthcare infrastructure. They did not know that the billionaire patriarch they worshipped was currently pacing his glass office in a cold sweat, waiting for a phone call from me that was never going to come. I pushed the locker room door open and walked back out into the chaotic trauma ward. The bright fluorescent lights illuminated the busy hallway. Paramedics rushed past me, pushing a stretcher toward Trauma Bay 4. I heard the attending surgeon calling for a Vanguard negative pressure wound vacuum to stabilize the bleeding. My invention, my company, my empire. I adjusted my stethoscope around my neck and calmly walked back to the central nurses' station to finish my shift. I had lives to save tonight, and tomorrow I had a wedding to destroy. 3 months after Catherine poured boiling coffee over my charting station, my grandmother was moved to a hospice care facility. She was my biological mother's mother, and the only person in my entire life who had ever shown me genuine, unconditional affection. She held my hand, her skin as thin and fragile as tissue paper. She asked for one final favor before her mind faded completely. She begged me to attend Chelsea's bachelorette weekend in Aspen, Colorado. Just try to make peace, Tessa, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of her oxygen machine. Let me leave this earth thinking my family is not entirely broken. I loved my grandmother deeply. I could not deny her dying wish. So I packed a small duffel bag and boarded a commercial flight. Chelsea and her 6 bridesmaids had flown out 2 days earlier on a private jet chartered by Harrison's wealthy family. I arrived at the luxury ski resort completely alone, taking a public shuttle up the freezing mountain roads. The venue was a sprawling, multi-million-dollar penthouse suite overlooking the snow-covered peaks. It had towering glass windows, heated marble floors, and a private outdoor hot tub. The moment I pushed through the heavy oak double doors, the sheer hostility in the room hit me like a physical wall. Chelsea was lounging on a massive velvet sectional sofa, surrounded by her wealthy friends. They were all wearing matching custom silk pajamas, sipping expensive champagne from crystal flutes. When Chelsea saw me, her fake smile did not reach her cold eyes. "Oh, good, you finally made it," she drawled loudly, ensuring her friends were paying close attention. "Grab those heavy garment bags by the door and bring them to the master suite, will you?" My arms are just absolutely exhausted from skiing all morning. One of her bridesmaids, a woman named Chloe, looked me up and down with blatant disgust. "Is this the nurse stepsister you were talking about?" Chloe asked, swirling her drink. "You look exhausted, honey. Do they make you work double shifts just to afford the plane ticket here?" The entire room erupted into sharp, cruel laughter. I looked at the heavy luggage piled by the entrance. I was not a guest on this trip. I was designated unpaid labor brought along specifically to serve as a human punching bag for Chelsea and her elite social circle. I remembered my promise to my dying grandmother. I took a slow, deep breath, picked up the heavy garment bags, and carried them down the long hallway without a single word of complaint. The entire weekend followed the exact same punishing pattern. Chelsea treated me like a hired servant. While she and her bridesmaids went out for high-end sushi lunches and exclusive spa treatments, I was instructed to stay behind and wait for the grocery delivery. I was told to organize the party favors, steam their delicate evening gowns, and clean up the empty liquor bottles they left scattered across the expensive imported rugs. Whenever I was in the same room, Chelsea made a point to mock my lifestyle. She loudly complained about how depressing it must be to work a measly nursing job wiping up bodily fluids for a pathetic hourly wage. She boasted about Harrison's family money, bragging that she would never have to work a single day in her life. Her friends would laugh, covering their mouths with perfectly manicured hands, looking at me with undisguised pity. I let them laugh. I let them drink their champagne and trade their shallow gossip. I knew my bank account held more wealth than all of their trust funds combined. I knew I was running a global medical empire while they were arguing over designer handbags, but I kept my mouth firmly shut. The real insult, however, came when it was time to go to sleep on the first night. The penthouse featured 5 massive bedrooms. Each room boasted a king-sized bed, high thread count linens, and a private ensuite bathroom with a deep soaking tub. There were exactly 6 women on the trip, including me. The math was simple. 2 women would have to share a king-sized bed. But when Chelsea handed out the room assignments, she looked right at me with a malicious smirk. "Tessa, you will have to take the pull-out couch in the main living room," she announced, casually flipping her blonde hair. "The girls need their beauty sleep, and you are probably used to sleeping on uncomfortable hospital cots anyway. Besides, the master suites are for actual guests. You understand, right?" I walked over to the living room couch and pulled off the heavy velvet cushions. I yanked the metal frame outward. It shrieked loudly, groaning against the strain. The mattress was incredibly thin and severely stained. A broken metal support bar protruded sharply right down the middle, making it physically impossible to lay flat without metal digging into my ribs. The living room also featured massive floor-to-ceiling windows with absolutely no blackout curtains. This meant the freezing alpine draft seeped right through the glass, chilling the room completely, and the morning sun would blind me directly at dawn. I grabbed a single scratchy blanket from a hallway closet and lay down on the broken mattress. The metal bar dug directly into my spine. I pulled the thin blanket up to my chin, shivering in the cold. I could hear Chelsea and her friends down the hallway, laughing uproariously in their warm, luxurious beds. They were probably texting each other jokes about the poor, pathetic stepsister freezing in the living room. I stared up at the vaulted ceiling, letting the biting cold air wash over my face. My grandmother wanted peace. She wanted a unified family. But lying on that broken couch, I realized peace was absolutely impossible. William, Catherine, and Chelsea were fundamentally incapable of basic human decency. They fed on cruelty. They thrived on making me feel inferior. They thought breaking my spirit was a fun weekend activity. I shifted my weight trying to find a comfortable position against the sharp metal bar. I was not going to break. I was going to endure this miserable trip, complete my promise to my dying grandmother, and then cut this toxic family out of my life permanently. I closed my eyes and listened to the howling mountain wind outside. I did not know it yet, but Chelsea's vicious need to dominate me was about to push her to make a massive, catastrophic mistake. A financial mistake that would ultimately give me the exact ammunition I needed to destroy her entire fake reality. The morning sun pierced through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, blinding me instantly. I sat up on the broken mattress, rubbing my aching spine. Before I could even attempt to find a warm cup of coffee, Chelsea's sharp voice echoed down the hallway. "Tessa, get in here. We need breakfast." I walked into the massive gourmet kitchen. Chelsea and her 6 bridesmaids were sitting around the marble island, still wearing their matching silk pajamas. They expected a full spread. For the next 2 hours, I functioned as their personal chef and maid. I cooked eggs, toasted artisanal bread, and brewed a specific brand of expensive espresso that Chelsea demanded. "Make sure you use the oat milk," Tessa, Chelsea ordered, tapping her perfectly manicured nails against the marble counter. "I know you are entirely accustomed to drinking that terrible, sludgy hospital cafeteria coffee, but we have actual standards here. Try not to ruin it." Her bridesmaid Chloe let out a loud, snorting laugh. "You really should not be too hard on her, Chelsea." Chloe sneered, looking at my basic gray sweatpants. "Your stepsister only makes a measly nursing salary. She probably had to eat cheap ramen noodles for 3 straight months just to afford the economy class shuttle ride from the airport." Chelsea smiled brightly, sipping her mimosa. "Exactly, Chloe. We are doing her a massive favor by letting her breathe the same high-altitude air as us." "Tell me, Tessa, how many disgusting bedpans did you actually have to empty to save up for this weekend? 1,000? 2,000? I placed a plate of perfectly toasted bread on the counter in front of her. I did not glare at her. I did not defend my honorable profession. I just wiped my hands on a dish towel and retreated to the background. The verbal abuse only escalated when we moved down into the high-end shopping district of Aspen. The snowy streets were lined with luxury boutiques and exclusive designer stores. Chelsea and her entourage strutted through the town like they owned it, trying on cashmere sweaters and diamond earrings. I was forced to trail 10 paces behind them, acting as a human pack mule. Every time they bought something, they shoved the heavy shopping bags into my arms. By noon, my hands were red and blistering from the freezing cold and the cutting weight of the thick paper handles. Inside an exclusive French boutique, Chelsea picked up a stunning white fur coat with a price tag of nearly $6,000. She draped it over her shoulders and posed in front of the full-length mirror. "Could you imagine Tessa wearing something like this?" Chelsea asked loudly, ensuring the wealthy store clerks could hear every single word. "She would absolutely ruin it. She would probably get infectious hospital germs all over the pristine fur. How many double shifts would you have to work just to buy one sleeve of this jacket, Tessa? 50 shifts, 100. The sales associates exchanged highly uncomfortable glances, but said nothing. I stood quietly near the entrance, holding 6 heavy shopping bags. My arms ached, but my mind was perfectly clear. I was analyzing every single one of Chelsea's desperate toxic behaviors. She was overcompensating wildly. She kept loudly announcing to the store clerks that she was marrying Harrison Maxwell, ensuring everyone knew she was about to join a billionaire family. Her arrogance was just a flimsy mask covering a deep, pathetic insecurity. Around 2 in the afternoon, the group stopped at the Alpine Rejuvenation Spa. It was an elite, ultra-exclusive wellness center that catered only to the ultra-rich. Chelsea instructed me to stay in the waiting area and guard their heavy winter coats while they went inside for private skincare consultations. "Tessa, I am absolutely parched," Chelsea commanded, dropping her heavy designer coat directly onto my lap. "Go down to the cafe on the corner and get me a sparkling water. the imported brand with the green glass bottle. Do not take too long. I placed her coat carefully on a velvet armchair. I tucked my faded canvas tote bag underneath it, hiding it from plain sight. I walked out of the spa and headed down the street to fulfill her petty demand. I was gone for exactly 12 minutes. When I returned, Chelsea and her friends were already being ushered into the private massage rooms. I sat back down on the velvet chair holding the cold glass bottle of water. Everything appeared completely normal. The true betrayal did not reveal itself until much later that evening. The girls had returned to the penthouse suite glowing and laughing loudly. They dropped several massive premium shopping bags onto the kitchen island. Chelsea poured herself another glass of champagne, throwing her arms wide. "I just treated myself to the ultimate bridal glow," she announced to the room. "Harrison is going to absolutely die when he sees how perfect I look on our wedding day. Only the best for a future Maxwell." I was standing by the sink washing the dishes they had carelessly abandoned earlier. Deep inside my duffel bag tucked away in the corner of the living room, my highly encrypted corporate phone began to vibrate violently. It was not a standard text message alert. It was the specific, aggressive buzz of a high-priority banking notification. I dried my hands quietly, walked over to my duffel bag, and pulled out the secure device. I stepped into the small powder room and locked the heavy wooden door behind me. I tapped my passcode into the screen. It was a direct fraud alert from my private wealth manager at my elite financial institution. The bold red text on the screen read, "Unusual activity detected on Vanguard Corporate Platinum card ending in 4028. I stared at the screen. I kept a single black metal corporate credit card hidden in a zippered secret compartment inside my canvas tote bag for extreme emergencies. I immediately pulled up the itemized charges. There were 2 massive transactions approved within the last 4 hours. The first charge was for $6,500 at the Alpine Rejuvenation Spa for an exclusive platinum bridal package. The second charge was for $11,500 at the French designer boutique down the street for 2 limited edition handbags. The total amount stolen was exactly $18,000. My blood ran ice cold. I realized exactly what had happened during those 12 minutes I was fetching her sparkling water. Chelsea had rummaged through my belongings. She had unzipped the hidden compartment of my canvas tote bag and found the solid metal platinum card. The golden child who spent the entire day mocking my measly nursing salary had actively committed grand theft. She was stealing from the very stepsister she viewed as a pathetic broke failure. She truly believed I was too poor to notice or too weak to do anything about it. She thought she had found a magical piece of plastic to fund her fake billionaire lifestyle. She had absolutely no idea that she had just handed me the exact legal and financial weapon I needed to destroy her entire wedding and send her straight to prison. I stared at the glowing screen of my encrypted phone for another 10 seconds, memorizing the exact dollar amounts. $18,000. It was a staggering sum of money to steal, but the sheer audacity of the crime was what truly amazed me. I did not panic. I simply pressed 2 buttons to take high-resolution screenshots of the fraudulent transactions and securely backed them up to my private cloud server. Then I opened my recording application, tapped the red microphone icon, and slipped the phone into the deep pocket of my sweatpants. It was time to give my stepsister enough rope to hang herself permanently. I unlocked the powder room door and walked back into the massive living area. The bridesmaids were busy taking selfies by the roaring fireplace, totally absorbed in their own vanity. Chelsea was standing near the kitchen island, pouring herself another glass of expensive vintage champagne. I walked straight up to her, keeping my face completely devoid of any readable emotion. "Chelsea," I said, my voice low enough that her friends could not hear. "We need to speak in the master bedroom right now." She rolled her eyes dramatically, letting out a heavy sigh. She took a slow sip of her drink. "What do you want, Tessa? I am busy celebrating my perfect life. If this is about you freezing on the broken couch, you can save your breath. I am not switching beds with you. This is about the $18,000 you just charged to my credit card," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly flat. Chelsea froze. The champagne flute in her hand trembled for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered her composure. She glanced over her shoulder to ensure her wealthy friends were not listening to our conversation. She grabbed her glass and marched down the long hallway toward the master suite. I followed closely behind her and firmly shut the heavy oak door, locking it with a sharp click. I stood by the door while Chelsea strutted over to the massive king-sized bed. She did not look guilty. She did not look ashamed. She looked incredibly annoyed that I had the nerve to confront her. "You went into my bag while I was fetching your water," I stated, laying out the facts with clinical precision. "You found my hidden card. You spent $6,500 at the Alpine Rejuvenation Spa and $11,500 at the French boutique. That is felony grand theft, Chelsea." Chelsea tossed her head back and let out a sharp, malicious laugh. "Oh, please stop being so utterly dramatic, Tessa. It is not grand theft. It is collecting a long overdue debt. Dad specifically told me that you owed us for ruining our lives with your depressing energy. He said you have been hoarding your measly nursing paychecks for years while living in squalor. I simply decided it was time for you to finally contribute to this family." "You stole from me," I repeated, ignoring her absurd justification. "You committed credit card fraud." Chelsea walked toward me, her designer silk pajamas rustling against the thick carpet. She stopped just inches from my face, her eyes practically glowing with wicked arrogance. "You should be thanking me," she sneered. "I am putting your pathetic little savings to actual good use. Those handbags and those spa treatments are going to make me look absolutely flawless for Harrison. You are basically investing in my marriage to a billionaire. You should feel honored to play a tiny part in my success." My phone was safely tucked in my pocket, capturing every single word of her arrogant confession. I kept my posture relaxed and unthreatening. "What makes you think I will not simply dispute the charges with my bank?" I asked. "What makes you think I will not call the Aspen Police Department right now and have you arrested for theft?" Chelsea's smile widened into a predatory grin. She leaned in closer, her breath smelling strongly of alcohol. "Because if you even try to dispute those charges, I will destroy you," she whispered, her voice dripping with pure venom. "If you call the bank or the police, I will call Harrison immediately. I will cry hysterically and tell him that you stole my engagement ring. I will tell him you are a jealous, psychotic spinster who is deeply obsessed with ruining my wedding because nobody will ever love you." She stepped back, crossing her arms over her chest triumphantly. "Who do you think Harrison will believe, Tessa? Will he believe his beautiful, glamorous future wife? Or will he believe the bitter, broke nurse who sleeps on a broken couch and wears cheap sweatpants? He already knows you have mental health issues because I told him you are unstable. If you make one move against me, I will ensure you are institutionalized." I looked at her perfectly contoured face and felt an overwhelming wave of cold satisfaction. She had just handed me the absolute perfect weapon. She had admitted to the theft. She had admitted to the premeditated blackmail. She had verbally threatened to destroy my reputation and falsely accuse me of a crime. The audio recording capturing this entire interaction was completely flawless. I did not yell at her. I did not scream or cry or beg for my money back. I simply looked her up and down with an expression of pure clinical detachment. "Enjoy the handbags, Chelsea," I said, my voice dangerously calm. I hope the spa treatments were worth it. I turned around, unlocked the bedroom door, and walked back out into the hallway. Behind me, I could hear Chelsea laughing triumphantly. She genuinely believed she had won. She believed her vicious blackmail had terrified me into absolute submission. She thought she had successfully bullied a weak, pathetic scapegoat into paying for her luxury lifestyle. I returned to my spot on the broken pull-out couch in the living room. I pulled my secure phone out of my pocket and ended the voice recording. I saved the audio file directly to my highly encrypted corporate legal drive, where my team of ruthless corporate lawyers would have immediate access to it. Then I opened my banking application. I looked at the pending $18,000 balance on my platinum card. For a chief executive officer with a net worth of over $120 million, $18,000 was nothing. It was literal pocket change. It was the cost of doing business. I tapped the screen and paid the stolen balance in full. By clearing the charges, I ensured the transaction was fully completed and documented. There would be no fraud alerts for Chelsea to hide behind. There would be no canceled transactions for her to explain away. I was cementing her crime into permanent financial history. I was methodically gathering the rope she would soon use to hang herself. I laid back down on the uncomfortable metal bar of the mattress and smiled into the freezing darkness of the room. The trap was officially set. I pulled the scratchy blanket up to my chin, listening to the loud, obnoxious music blasting from the master suite. Chelsea and her bridesmaids were celebrating their perceived dominance over me. They were toasting to their stolen luxury goods, completely blind to the reality of the situation. Every sip of champagne Chelsea took was another nail in the coffin of her upcoming marriage. She thought she was marrying into the Maxwell family empire. She thought she was untouchable. But I held the audio files, the financial receipts, and the ultimate power to crush her entire existence. She wanted to play a high-stakes game of extortion and theft. I was going to let her play right up until the rehearsal dinner, where I would drop the hammer and shatter her world into a million irreparable pieces. Sleep came easily to me that night. I rested peacefully on that broken couch, knowing the exact moment of my revenge was rapidly approaching. The week after the miserable Aspen trip, the Maxwell family hosted an opulent pre-wedding cocktail reception. The event took place at their sprawling private country club estate just outside the city limits. William and Catherine spent the entire morning frantically obsessing over their outfits. They were completely desperate to impress the billionaire family that would soon become their financial salvation. I attended the event for one reason only. I needed to observe my prey in their natural habitat. I wore a simple conservative navy blue dress. I walked into the grand reception hall and immediately positioned myself near a tall marble pillar. I held a glass of sparkling water and quietly surveyed the room. The space was packed with ruthless venture capitalists and high society socialites. My biological father was practically sweating through his suit as he tried to shake hands with men who completely ignored him. My stepmother was following him around, carrying a plate of appetizers, trying to laugh at jokes she did not understand. Chelsea was standing in the center of the room, performing her absolute favorite role. She wore a pristine white lace designer gown, acting like a pure, innocent angel. She clung tightly to the arm of a tall, incredibly handsome man. This was Harrison Maxwell, the groom. He had dark hair, a strong jawline, and a surprisingly warm smile. As I watched him interact with the guests, I noticed something completely unexpected. Harrison looked entirely out of place among these corporate sharks. He did not possess the cold, calculating arrogance of his father, Jonathan. Harrison smiled genuinely at the waitstaff, thanking them every time they cleared a glass. He listened attentively when people spoke to him, instead of looking over their shoulders for someone more important. I stood by my marble pillar, wondering how a man who seemed so profoundly grounded had ended up engaged to a textbook narcissist like my stepsister. He was obviously blinded by her carefully constructed facade of sweetness and charity. It did not take long for Harrison to notice me standing alone in the shadows. I watched as he gently detached himself from Chelsea's tight grip. He whispered something in her ear and began walking across the crowded room directly toward my corner. He moved with a relaxed, confident grace. When he reached me, he extended his right hand with a bright, welcoming smile. He introduced himself as Harrison and said he was incredibly happy to finally meet me. He mentioned that Chelsea had told him I would be attending today. I braced myself, expecting him to deliver a veiled insult based on whatever vicious lies Chelsea had fed him over the past year. I fully expected him to ask why I was so bitter, or why I refused to support his beautiful bride. Instead, he simply thanked me for being there and said he valued family above everything else. His voice carried no hidden agenda and no condescension. Harrison asked me what I did for a living. I told him I worked as a trauma nurse at the city hospital. I fully expected him to quickly change the subject to something more glamorous or profitable. I expected the usual polite dismissal I received from wealthy men who thought nursing was just a stepping stone to finding a rich doctor husband. Instead, Harrison's eyes lit up with deep, genuine respect. He stepped closer, giving me his complete, undivided attention. He asked thoughtful, intelligent questions about the emergency room. He wanted to know how I handled the intense pressure of saving lives and what drew me to the medical field in the first place. He listened to my answers without interrupting a single time, making me feel like the most important person in the massive room. Then Harrison shared a deeply personal story. He told me that his family owed a massive unpayable debt to trauma nurses. He explained that exactly 1 year ago, his mother had been involved in a horrific multi-car pileup on the freezing winter highway. He described the terror his family felt waiting in the hospital lobby. He said a brilliant off-duty nurse had climbed into the back of the emergency transport vehicle and physically kept his mother's airway open, saving her life before the ambulance even reached the surgical bay. I froze completely. I kept my facial expression perfectly blank, but my heart raced wildly in my chest. I knew exactly who that heroic nurse was. It was me. I had saved Jonathan Maxwell's wife that night. I listened to Harrison speak with profound empathy and immense gratitude. He was a truly good man trapped in a terrible web of lies and manipulation. Across the grand room, Chelsea finally noticed us talking. Absolute panic flashed across her perfectly contoured face. She practically sprinted across the reception hall, her expensive heels clicking frantically against the polished hardwood floor. She lunged forward and grabbed Harrison's arm, digging her manicured nails into his expensive suit jacket. She tried to physically pull him away from me using her entire body weight. She let out a loud, artificial laugh and told Harrison they desperately needed to go greet some important real estate investors near the open bar. Over Harrison's shoulder, she shot me a look of pure, lethal warning. Her eyes screamed at me to step back and disappear back into the shadows where she believed I belonged. But Harrison did not move. He gently but firmly resisted Chelsea's frantic pull. He placed his large hand over hers and told her to wait a moment. He said he was truly enjoying getting to know her sister. Chelsea visibly seethed at his public rejection. Her neck turned a patchy shade of red as she realized she could not control him in this moment. She forced a tight, painful smile and told Harrison that I was just so boring with my depressing hospital stories. She said we should not ruin the happy party atmosphere by talking about sick people and dirty bedpans. She was desperately trying to diminish me in his eyes, just like she always did when we were growing up. Harrison frowned deeply. The warm, welcoming smile completely vanished from his face. He looked at Chelsea with genuine confusion and visible disappointment. He corrected her right in front of me. He told her in a very serious tone that saving human lives is never depressing. He said it was the most honorable profession in the world, and that they should both be incredibly proud of the work I do every single day. Chelsea's polite mask completely slipped for a fraction of a second. Her jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might actually crack under the pressure. She absolutely hated that Harrison was defending the family scapegoat. She hated that she could not manipulate his perception of me. She nodded stiffly, swallowing her toxic pride because she could not risk losing her billionaire groom over a petty argument. I watched this subtle but massive crack form in their relationship. I smiled politely and excused myself, telling Harrison it was a wonderful pleasure to meet him. I watched Chelsea immediately drag him away toward the bar, whispering frantically in his ear to smooth things over. I realized right then that Harrison was entirely blind to Chelsea's gold-digging reality, but he was not stupid. The seed of doubt had been firmly planted in his mind today. I reached down and touched the pocket of my navy blue dress where my encrypted phone rested safely against my side. It held the secure audio blackmail file and the stolen $18,000 credit card receipts from Aspen. Chelsea thought she had secured her royal crown today by keeping Harrison away from me. She had no idea the massive explosion was already counting down. Jonathan Maxwell did not say those words out loud, not yet. He swallowed hard, the realization hitting him with the force of a freight train. He stepped entirely away from the head table, leaving his bewildered son and a panicking Chelsea standing in his wake. Chelsea let out a frantic, nervous laugh and reached out to grab his tuxedo sleeve. "Jonathan, where are you going?" she chirped, her voice cracking with pure desperation. "The toast is not finished yet. We are supposed to drink to the bride and groom." He brushed her hand off his jacket as if she were nothing more than a minor annoyance. He did not even look at her. His eyes remained permanently fixed on me. He walked past the towering floral arrangements and the expensive ice sculptures. The steady sound of his footsteps echoed like a metronome, counting down to my family's absolute destruction. My biological father, William, gripped the edge of his table so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. Catherine. My stepmother sat frozen, her mouth hanging slightly open. They watched the billionaire patriarch, the man holding the keys to their financial salvation, march directly toward the dark corner of the ballroom where they had banished me. They expected him to demand my removal. They expected him to call security and have the embarrassing hospital nurse thrown out onto the street. Jonathan reached table 10. The three fraternity brothers sitting next to me practically stopped breathing. They scrambled to push their chairs back, shrinking away from the sheer power radiating from the older man. My deaf great-uncle just smiled and took a bite of his bread roll, blissfully unaware of the tectonic shift happening in the room. I did not stand up. I did not shrink away. I sat perfectly upright in my cheap navy blue dress, maintaining absolute eye contact with the most powerful venture capitalist in the city. I placed my hands neatly on the table, waiting for his next move. Jonathan stopped directly in front of my chair. He looked down at me, his chest heaving slightly. The polite, polished mask of the untouchable billionaire was completely gone. In its place was a look of profound, genuine reverence. He slowly reached out and extended his right hand toward me. "You are Tessa Caldwell," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried through the dead, silent ballroom like a thunderclap. "You are the Chief Executive Officer and founder of Vanguard Medical Innovations." The silence in the room shattered. A collective gasp rippled through the 95 elite guests. Wealthy investors, socialites, and corporate executives immediately started whispering to one another. The name Vanguard Medical carried massive weight in these circles. Everyone in this room knew the company. They knew the astronomical valuations. They knew about the groundbreaking patents that were currently dominating the global healthcare market. What they did not know was that the elusive, brilliant founder of that empire was sitting right in front of them, wearing an off-the-rack dress and sitting by the kitchen doors. I looked at Jonathan's outstretched hand. I let him wait for 3 agonizing seconds before I finally raised my hand and firmly shook his. "It is a pleasure to formally meet you, Jonathan," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured and professional. Chelsea let out a loud, shrill noise from the front of the room. It sounded like a dying bird. She picked up the heavy skirt of her custom silk rehearsal dress and marched down the center aisle, her face red with absolute fury and confusion. "Jonathan, what are you doing?" she demanded, her voice screeching over the murmurs of the crowd. "You are making a mistake. She is not a chief executive officer. She is my stepsister Tessa. She is just a broke nurse. She works graveyard shifts at the local hospital. She does not know anything about medical innovations. She is poor." Jonathan finally turned his head to look at his future daughter-in-law. The look of utter disgust on his face was absolutely devastating. He looked at Chelsea like she was a repulsive insect that had just crawled across his expensive dinner plate. "Do not insult my intelligence, young woman." Jonathan snapped, his voice dripping with pure ice. "I know exactly who this woman is. I have spent the last 8 months directing my entire acquisition team to track her down. My firm has been begging her chief financial officer for a simple 10-minute introductory meeting. We have offered to fly our entire executive board anywhere in the world just to sit in the same room as her, and she has completely ignored every single one of our phone calls." The ballroom erupted into chaotic whispers again. Jonathan Maxwell, the untouchable titan of venture capital, had just publicly admitted to chasing me. He had just confessed his own corporate desperation in front of his elite peers. He was so incredibly shocked to find me sitting at his son's rehearsal dinner that he completely abandoned all high society protocol. William pushed his chair back and stumbled to his feet. He looked like he was going to pass out. He grabbed his chest, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Tessa," he choked out. "What is he talking about? What company?" I ignored my biological father entirely. I kept my focus strictly on Jonathan. "Your firm has been quite persistent, Jonathan," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. "My chief financial officer, Monica, mentioned you called her private line 4 times last Friday." I apologize for the silence. My executive calendar is incredibly demanding. Running a global medical empire while maintaining my clinical trauma shifts leaves me with very little free time for venture capital meetings. Jonathan did not care about the public rejection. He was looking at me like I was the Holy Grail. I understand completely, Miss Caldwell, he said, lowering his head in a gesture of absolute respect. Your dedication to patient care is exactly why Vanguard is the most valuable medical asset on the global market today. I just cannot fathom why a woman of your immense stature and profound brilliance is sitting in the back corner of this room. I smiled a cold, sharp smile that sent a visible shiver down Chelsea's spine. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. I was placed here by the bride, I stated smoothly. She wanted to make sure I stayed far away from the important guests. She told everyone I was just a bedpan cleaner. I suppose she thought my presence would ruin her perfect high society aesthetic. Jonathan slowly turned his head back toward Chelsea and my parents. The air in the ballroom dropped by 20 degrees. The billionaire patriarch stood up to his full height, his shoulders squaring as he prepared to unleash his absolute fury upon the people who had just spent the entire evening mocking the most important woman in the city. Saved my wife. Jonathan Maxwell finished his sentence, and the words struck the silent ballroom with the devastating force of a physical blow. He did not say it quietly. He projected his voice so that every single wealthy investor, socialite, and corporate executive in the massive room heard him perfectly. He turned his back on me for a brief moment to face the head table. His eyes locked onto my biological father, William, and my stepmother, Catherine. The sheer cold fury radiating from the billionaire patriarch made the air in the room feel heavy and dangerous. You find it highly amusing to mock the people who save lives, Jonathan said, his voice vibrating with absolute disgust as he stared directly at Chelsea. You stand on that stage holding a crystal champagne flute, and you think that makes you superior to the individuals who stand in the trenches when tragedy strikes. You think mocking a nurse is a clever joke. Chelsea shrank back against the head table. Her confident, glamorous facade evaporated completely. Jonathan, I was just making a joke, she stammered, her voice frantic and high-pitched. It was just a little family humor. I did not mean anything by it. My wife Clara is alive today because of this woman you just tried to humiliate, Jonathan declared, shutting her down instantly. Harrison stepped forward, his eyes wide with profound shock. Dad, what are you saying? Clara's accident. Jonathan nodded, keeping his stern, unyielding gaze fixed on my family. Exactly 1 year ago, my wife was involved in a catastrophic multi-car pileup on the interstate. Black ice had turned the highway into a literal death trap. Clara was trapped inside crushed metal. The paramedics were overwhelmed by the sheer number of casualties. Her airway was collapsing. She had less than 3 minutes left to live. I remembered that freezing night perfectly. I had just finished a brutal 14-hour clinical shift. I was driving home in my beat-up sedan when I saw the flashing lights and the twisted, smoking steel. I did not think twice. I pulled my car over to the icy shoulder and ran straight into the wreckage. Jonathan continued, his voice thick with raw, powerful emotion. An off-duty nurse was driving past the horrific scene. She had no protective gear. She had no surgical instruments. She crawled through the shattered glass and the jagged metal in the freezing sleet. She found my wife suffocating. She used her bare hands to manually open Clara's airway and physically hold it open while the rescue teams cut her out of the vehicle. The 95 elite guests sat completely mesmerized. Women covered their mouths in shock. Men stared at me with profound, newfound respect. That nurse refused to leave my wife's side, Jonathan told the crowd. She climbed into the back of the ambulance. She rode all the way to the trauma center, kneeling on the freezing metal floor, covered in blood, refusing to let go until the surgical team took over. She saved Clara's life, and then she quietly washed her hands and disappeared into the night before I could even arrive at the hospital to thank her. I kept my face perfectly calm, but I felt a small, tight knot of emotion in my own chest. I never did it for the recognition or the reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I spent the last 12 months employing private investigators to find that anonymous angel Jonathan, said, his voice echoing with immense power. I wanted to give her half my fortune out of sheer gratitude. 6 weeks ago, my investigators finally uncovered her true identity. Imagine my absolute shock when I realized the mysterious trauma nurse who saved my family was the exact same brilliant billionaire chief executive officer my firm had been desperately trying to secure a meeting with. The entire ballroom erupted into a frenzy of shocked whispers. The phrase billionaire chief executive officer echoed rapidly through the crowd. The wealthy socialites who had looked at me with open pity just 20 minutes ago were now staring at me like I was royalty. The venture capitalists in the room connected the dots, instantly realizing that the woman at table 10 controlled Vanguard Medical Innovations. The fraternity brothers sitting next to me looked like they wanted the polished marble floor to open up and swallow them whole. They had spent the entire evening ignoring a woman who could buy and sell their entire futures with a single phone call. Chelsea looked like she was going to be physically sick. Her face turned a patchy, ugly shade of crimson. Her hands shook violently, clutching her expensive designer dress. She shook her head in rapid, frantic denial. "No," Chelsea stammered loudly. "No, that is impossible. She is lying to you, Jonathan. Tessa does not have a company. She lives in a tiny, ugly apartment. She is just a nobody. She is poor." Harrison stepped right in front of Chelsea, physically blocking her view of his father. He looked at his beautiful bride with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Stop talking, Chelsea," Harrison commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous warning tone. "Do not say another word." Harrison then turned to look at me. The naive, sweet groom who had been completely blinded by my stepsister's fake charm was entirely gone. In his place was a man who suddenly realized he was about to marry a toxic monster. He placed his right hand over his heart and bowed his head to me in a deep, sincere gesture of absolute respect. "You saved my mother," Harrison said quietly. "My family owes you a debt we can never repay. I am so deeply sorry for how you have been treated tonight." I offered Harrison a single polite nod, acknowledging his genuine apology. He was an innocent casualty in my family's toxic war. At the head table, William and Catherine were entirely paralyzed by sheer panic. The horrific reality of their situation was finally crashing down on them. They had just watched the most powerful man in the city declare his undying loyalty and profound respect for the daughter they had abused and discarded. They had built their entire financial survival strategy on impressing the Maxwell family. They desperately needed Jonathan Maxwell to save their bankrupt real estate firm. And they had just spent the entire evening publicly torturing the one woman Jonathan Maxwell worshipped. William's face was completely drained of blood. He looked like a man standing on the gallows. He tried to open his mouth to speak, to formulate some kind of desperate, groveling excuse, but absolutely no sound came out. Catherine gripped the edge of the table, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the white silk tablecloth. Her elaborate plan to use Chelsea's marriage as a stepping stone to extreme wealth was disintegrating into dust right before her eyes. "You called her a bedpan cleaner," Jonathan snarled, taking a menacing step toward William and Catherine. "You sat there and laughed while your spoiled, arrogant daughter mocked a woman whose shoes you are not even worthy to shine. You are the most pathetic excuse for a family I have ever had the misfortune of encountering." Jonathan turned his back on my biological father, dismissing him entirely. He looked back at me, the fierce anger in his eyes immediately melting away into deep admiration. "Miss Caldwell," Jonathan said, his tone shifting to absolute reverence. "My wife Clara has been praying for the chance to meet you. When she hears what happened in this room tonight, she will be absolutely devastated by how my son's future in-laws have disrespected you. Please allow me to escort you to a better table. You should be sitting at the very head of this room, not hiding in the shadows." I looked at Jonathan, and then I looked at the ruined, terrified faces of William, Catherine, and Chelsea. The trap had closed perfectly. The public reckoning was in full swing, and they were suffocating under the weight of their own cruelty. But I was not quite finished yet. I reached into my small clutch purse, and my fingers wrapped around the crisp paper receipt from Aspen. It was time to deliver the final lethal blow. I kept my hand inside my purse, feeling the sharp edges of the folded paper. Before I could respond to Jonathan's gracious offer, Chelsea suddenly lost what little remained of her mind. The sheer reality of her absolute defeat broke her fragile psyche completely in half. She shoved past Harrison her expensive white lace dress, tangling awkwardly around her legs as she stumbled forward. Her perfectly styled hair fell wildly across her face. She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. "You are all being conned!" she shrieked, her voice echoing violently across the dining room. Her tone was so shrill it made several guests physically wince. "She is lying, Jonathan. She is a psychotic, jealous liar. She has spent her entire life trying to steal my spotlight because she is a pathetic, miserable loser. She does not own a medical company. She is just a bitter, broke nurse trying to ruin my perfect wedding. She is absolutely nothing." Harrison grabbed Chelsea's arm, trying to pull her back, but she yanked herself free with surprising force. She was hyperventilating, her face flushed a dark, patchy red. She looked entirely deranged, a complete contrast to the elegant blushing bride she had pretended to be all evening. "Look at her cheap dress," she yelled, gesturing frantically at my navy blue outfit. "Do not let her manipulate you. She is trying to trick your family." Jonathan slowly turned his head to look at Chelsea. The absolute disgust in his eyes could have frozen boiling water. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The quiet, lethal authority in his tone was infinitely more terrifying than her unhinged screaming. "You are speaking to the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Medical Innovations," Jonathan said coldly, each word landing like a physical strike. "You are speaking to a woman who holds the patents that sustain this entire city's healthcare infrastructure, and you are speaking to the savior of my family. The fact that you dare to call her a liar in my presence proves exactly how dangerously delusional and incredibly toxic you truly are." Jonathan then shifted his lethal gaze to William and Catherine, who were practically trembling in their expensive chairs at the head table. "And as for you two," Jonathan continued, his voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating silence of the ballroom. "You came to my private office last month begging for a massive corporate loan. You spun some pathetic, fabricated story about temporary cash flow issues at your commercial real estate firm. You thought marrying this arrogant, spoiled girl into my family would magically secure your financial bailout. You actually thought I would hand you a blank check to save your sinking ship." William raised his hands in a desperate, trembling plea. The arrogant, booming father who had laughed at my humiliation just minutes ago was completely gone. "Jonathan, please, we can explain everything," William begged, his voice cracking with pure panic. "Just give us a chance to speak in private." "There is absolutely no explanation required," Jonathan snapped, shutting my biological father down instantly. "Let me make this perfectly clear to you, William. I would rather burn my venture capital firm to the ground than invest a single penny into your bankrupt, fraudulent enterprise. Your business is completely dead to me. Your entire family is dead to me. You will never secure a meeting in this city again. I will personally ensure every investor in this room knows exactly how toxic your judgment is." The absolute devastation on William's face was a masterpiece of instant karma. He slumped back into his chair, looking as though he had aged 20 years in 20 seconds. Catherine buried her face in her hands, sobbing genuine tears of terror as her luxurious fake life evaporated into thin air. She knew the country club memberships, the designer clothes, and the high society status were permanently gone. I watched their sudden total destruction with absolute serenity. Jonathan had just handed them their financial death sentence on a silver platter. I finally removed my hand from my clutch purse holding the folded piece of paper. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up from table 10. The 95 elite guests watched my every single move in absolute breathless silence. No one dared to speak. No one dared to intervene. I walked deliberately past the fraternity brothers who were staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. I walked past the towering white floral arrangements and the crystal champagne flutes. I walked straight up the center aisle toward the head table, where Chelsea stood hyperventilating and shaking with pure, unchecked rage. She glared at me, her chest heaving, trying desperately to summon another venomous insult to throw at my face. I did not give her the chance to speak a single word. I reached out and gently picked up a pristine white cloth napkin from the table. I slowly and methodically wiped the corners of my mouth, maintaining unblinking eye contact with my stepsister. I placed the napkin neatly beside her dinner plate. Then I unfolded the crisp piece of paper I had been holding the entire time. It was the detailed, itemized credit card receipt from Aspen, Colorado. The undeniable physical proof of her $18,000 grand theft. I dropped the receipt directly onto the center of Chelsea's expensive porcelain dinner plate. It landed with a soft flutter right on top of her untouched lobster thermidor. The bold printed numbers stared back at her. $6,500 for the elite spa treatments. $11,500 for the luxury designer handbags. Chelsea looked down at the receipt, and all the blood instantly drained from her flushed face, leaving her completely ashen. She knew exactly what that paper was. She knew I had kept the concrete evidence of her felony. She knew her malicious blackmail scheme had failed completely and spectacularly. "Enjoy the wedding, Chelsea," I said, my voice perfectly calm and echoing clearly through the utterly silent ballroom. "It is the absolute last thing I am ever paying for." I turned my back on her shattered reality. I did not look at William or Catherine as they wept over their ruined empire. I gave Jonathan Maxwell a polite professional nod of respect, acknowledging his defense. I offered Harrison a small, sympathetic smile, knowing his heart was about to break when he discovered the truth about his bride. Then I walked straight down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. My steady, confident footsteps were the only sound in the entire magnificent venue. 95 wealthy elite guests parted like the Red Sea, allowing me to pass without obstruction. I pushed open the heavy mahogany double doors and walked out into the cool, refreshing night air, leaving them all behind to choke on the toxic ashes of their ruined lives. The stunned, absolute silence I left in my wake was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. At my sister's wedding rehearsal dinner, she thought it would be funny to introduce me to her wealthy new-in-laws by saying, "This is my stepsister Tessa. She is just a nurse. Do not ask her about business or investments tonight, folks. Someone has to change the bedpans, right?" She laughed loudly into the microphone. My biological father burst out laughing from the head table. My stepmother smirked. They all thought I was the ultimate loser. Until the groom's billionaire father stood up and stared at me. "Wait," he said, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "You are the girl who—" His next words froze the entire room. "My name is Tessa. I am 33 years old, and I have spent my entire life letting my blended family treat me like the dirt on their designer shoes." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who underestimated your worth. The morning sun poured through the massive bay windows of the luxury bridal suite at the Grand Marquis Hotel. It was supposed to be the happiest morning of Chelsea's life. The spacious room was decorated with white roses and expensive silk draping, but the atmosphere inside was absolutely toxic. There was no joyful laughter or clinking champagne glasses. The bridal party had been completely banished. The expensive makeup artists and hairstylists had been ordered to leave the room by my stepmother, Catherine, who was currently pacing across the thick carpet like a caged animal. Chelsea sat on the edge of a plush velvet sofa, clutching her custom white lace wedding gown against her chest. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying all night. Her perfectly planned high society future was hanging by a single terrifying thread. She kept staring at her phone, waiting for a text message from Harrison that never came. He had not spoken a single word to her since he walked out of the rehearsal dinner the previous night. The heavy wooden door to the suite violently burst open. My biological father, William, marched into the room. He looked absolutely atrocious. His expensive suit was deeply wrinkled and his tie hung loosely around his neck. He had clearly not slept for a single second. He was holding his cell phone to his ear, his face twisted into a mask of pure panic. "No, you listen to me!" William screamed into the phone, his voice cracking with desperation. "You cannot pull the credit line today. We have a 30-day grace period. If you freeze those accounts, the commercial properties will go into immediate default. Just give me 48 hours to secure the Maxwell capital." William stopped walking and listened to the person on the other end of the line. The remaining color drained completely from his face. The phone slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a loud thud. He did not bother to pick it up. He just stood there, staring blankly at the wall. "William, what is happening?" Catherine demanded, her voice shrill and demanding. Who was on the phone? Was it the bank? Tell me they extended the grace period. We just need to get through this wedding ceremony today. Once Chelsea and Harrison say their vows, Jonathan will be legally bound to our family. He will have to approve the corporate bailout. He cannot let his own sons-in-laws go bankrupt. William slowly turned his head to look at his wife. The look of pure hatred in his eyes made Catherine take a physical step backward. There is no grace period, he said, his voice dropping to a terrifying hollow whisper. The bank just froze every single one of our commercial accounts. They saw the financial news this morning. Word is already spreading through the venture capital sector that Jonathan Maxwell publicly severed all ties with my firm last night. Chelsea let out a loud, dramatic sob from the velvet sofa. This is all Tessa's fault, she cried, wiping her ruined makeup. She deliberately sabotaged my rehearsal dinner. She wants to ruin my wedding because she is jealous. Shut up, William roared, spinning around to face his golden child. Just shut your mouth, Chelsea. For once in your spoiled, useless life, just be quiet. Chelsea physically recoiled, pressing herself against the back of the sofa. William had never yelled at her like that before. He had always treated her like a flawless princess. Seeing his sudden explosive rage completely terrified her. Catherine immediately rushed forward to defend her daughter. Do not yell at her! William, Catherine snapped, pointing a manicured finger at his chest. Chelsea did nothing wrong. It is your pathetic biological daughter who ruined everything. Tessa is the one who embarrassed us. William let out a harsh, bitter laugh that sounded almost unhinged. We embarrassed ourselves, Catherine, he yelled, throwing his hands in the air. You two idiots had to push her. You had to make your petty, cruel little jokes. You had to pour boiling coffee on her paperwork. You had to publicly mock her in front of 95 elite guests. Do you have any idea what you have done? Tessa is not just a nurse. She is Vanguard Medical Innovations. She is the golden goose Jonathan Maxwell desperately needs to save his own empire. We did not know, Catherine argued defensively, her voice trembling. How could we possibly know she was a chief executive officer hiding millions of dollars? She lives in a dump. She wears cheap scrubs. It does not matter what she wears. William screamed, his face turning a dark, violent shade of red. What matters is that we are completely bankrupt. We are totally dead, Catherine. The word bankrupt hung in the opulent bridal suite like a toxic cloud. Chelsea stopped crying and looked at her mother in absolute shock. What do you mean, bankrupt? Chelsea asked, her voice dropping to a panicked whisper. Dad, what are you talking about? We are rich. We live in a mansion. William laughed again, staring at his golden child with pure disgust. We do not own anything, Chelsea. The mansion is leveraged to the absolute maximum. We took out 3 separate mortgages just to keep the lights on and pay for your designer clothes. My real estate firm has not closed a profitable deal in over 4 years. We owe millions of dollars to private lenders. The only reason we are not living on the street right now is because I promised the bank that my daughter was marrying the heir to the Maxwell venture capital fortune. Catherine sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. We put everything into this wedding, she sobbed. We took out high-interest loans just to pay for the venue and the flowers. We thought Harrison would pay off our debts once you were married. Chelsea looked sick. The reality of her situation was finally crashing down on her. She was not a wealthy socialite marrying for love. She was a financial pawn. Her entire luxurious lifestyle was a massive house of cards built on debt and lies, and now the one man who could save them was completely disgusted by her behavior. We need to fix this, Catherine said, standing up suddenly. Her manipulative mind was racing, trying to find a way out of the trap. Tessa is family. She is your biological daughter, William. If she is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, she can pay off our debts. She can buy our commercial properties. We just need to go to her and apologize. We will tell her we were stressed about the wedding. We will remind her that we put a roof over her head for 16 years. She owes us a bailout. William paced across the room, running a hand over his face. You saw her last night, Catherine. You heard what she said. She does not care about us. She looked at us like we were garbage. She is just holding a grudge, Catherine insisted, her voice growing frantic and desperate. She is playing hard to get because she finally has some power. But she is still the same pathetic girl who wants our approval. We just need to find her right now. We will go to her house and demand she help her family. We will not take no for an answer." Chelsea looked down at her lap, her breathing becoming shallow and uneven. "Mom," she whispered, her voice shaking with genuine terror. "Even if we get Tessa's money, we have a massive problem with Harrison." "What are you talking about?" Catherine demanded. "Harrison is a naive fool. You just need to cry and tell him you were intimidated by Tessa. Put on your wedding dress and smile. He will forgive you." Chelsea closed her eyes tightly. "You do not understand," she cried. "Last night before Tessa walked out, she dropped a piece of paper on my dinner plate. It was a receipt from Aspen, a credit card receipt for $18,000. William's eyes widened in horror. "What receipt, Chelsea? What did you do?" "I stole her credit card out of her purse at the bachelorette party," Chelsea confessed, sobbing loudly now. "I bought designer handbags and spa treatments. I told her if she reported it, I would tell Harrison she was a psycho trying to ruin my wedding. I thought she was poor. I thought she would be too scared to fight back. But she kept the receipt. She kept all the evidence. If Harrison saw that receipt on my plate last night, he knows I am a thief. He knows I am a fraud. He is going to cancel the wedding." The bridal suite descended into absolute chaotic silence. William stared at his golden child with a look of profound, absolute devastation. The realization that they were completely trapped with zero leverage and zero hope finally broke them. Their entire fake reality was officially dead, and the wedding ceremony was set to begin in just 4 hours. "We have to find Tessa right now." William commanded, his voice dead and hollow. "Get dressed. We are going to find her, and we are going to beg." Finding my actual address took William exactly 45 minutes. He used his remaining commercial real estate contacts to bypass the privacy blocks on my residential records. When the GPS led them to the Platinum Tower in the center of the downtown financial district, they probably thought there was a mistake. It was the most exclusive residential skyscraper in the city, featuring private biometric elevators and round-the-clock armed concierge service. My $4 million penthouse occupied the entire top floor, offering unobstructed panoramic views of the skyline. William and Catherine did not care about protocol or security. Driven by pure financial terror, they tailgated a wealthy resident through the secure lobby doors and bullied their way past the front desk attendant by screaming that it was a medical family emergency. They rode the private elevator up to the penthouse level, their hearts pounding with a mixture of sheer panic and sudden overwhelming greed. I was standing in my massive gourmet kitchen pouring a cup of freshly ground espresso. I wore comfortable cashmere loungewear, enjoying the absolute silence of my sanctuary. The floor-to-ceiling glass walls flooded the open-concept living room with bright morning sunlight reflecting off the custom marble countertops. The private elevator chimed softly. The heavy steel doors slid open and William and Catherine burst directly into my foyer. They stopped dead in their tracks. The frantic, desperate energy they had brought up the elevator instantly evaporated, replaced by absolute, staggering awe. Catherine stared at the towering crystal chandelier and the original abstract paintings lining the gallery walls. William looked out at the massive wraparound terrace, his real estate brain quickly calculating the astronomical value of the property. They had spent over a decade telling their country club friends, "I lived in squalor." Now they were standing inside a fortress of wealth that eclipsed their heavily mortgaged mansion 10 times over. "Tessa," Catherine gasped, her voice trembling as she took a tentative step onto the imported hardwood floor. "This place is magnificent. You live here." I took a slow sip of my espresso. I did not flinch or reach for the security panic button. I simply watched them like subjects in a clinical trial. "How did you get past the lobby, Catherine?" I asked, my tone perfectly conversational. William stepped forward, physically pushing his wife aside. He forced a wide, unnatural smile onto his face. The same arrogant, booming father who had laughed at my humiliation last night was suddenly trying to play the role of a warm, loving patriarch. "Tessa, sweetie," William said, holding his hands open in a gesture of fake surrender. "We had to see you. We were so incredibly worried about you after you left the dinner last night in such a rush. We came here to make sure you were all right." Worried about me, I repeated smoothly. That is a fascinating narrative, William. Did you practice that on the car ride over here? Catherine rushed forward, her eyes darting frantically around the luxurious room, as if calculating exactly how many millions she could extract from it. Tessa, please, you have to listen to us. Last night was just a terrible misunderstanding. We were all under so much pressure with the wedding. You know how stressful these high society events can be. People say things they do not mean when they are stressed. We are your family. We love you. You have to forgive and forget. It is the right thing to do. Forgive and forget, I echoed, setting my espresso cup down on the marble counter. You poured boiling coffee over my medical charts. You allowed Chelsea to publicly refer to me as a bedpan cleaner. You stood by and laughed while I was humiliated. There is no misunderstanding, Catherine. You showed me exactly who you are. William dropped the warm father act instantly. The desperation clawed its way back to the surface of his face. He marched up to the edge of the kitchen island, gripping the marble edge with sweating hands. Tessa, we do not have time for this emotional nonsense, William demanded, his voice rising in panic. We are in serious trouble. The bank froze all my commercial real estate accounts this morning. Jonathan Maxwell is officially backing out of our corporate deal because of the stunt you pulled last night. Our firm is going to completely collapse by Monday if we do not inject a massive amount of capital immediately. He pointed a shaking finger at the expensive surroundings. You have hundreds of millions of dollars tied up in Vanguard Medical. You live in a $4 million penthouse. You can fix this with a single phone call to your bank. We need a bailout, Tessa. We need it right now. I looked at his desperate, sweating face. You want me to give you a corporate bailout? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. You want me to hand you my hard-earned money to save your fraudulent bankrupt firm? You owe us, William screamed, his face turning a blotchy red. I put a roof over your head for 16 years. I fed you. I clothed you. I raised you. You are my biological daughter, and you have a fundamental duty to protect this family. We invested in your childhood, and now it is time for you to pay us back. If you let my company go under, you are destroying your own legacy. Catherine stepped closer, her eyes wide with manufactured tears. And the receipt you left on Chelsea's plate last night, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Tessa, you have to understand that Chelsea was just acting out. It was a cry for help. She was intimidated by your independence. You cannot hold a silly little shopping spree against your own sister. She is about to walk down the aisle. You have to call Harrison right now and tell him it was all a big joke. Tell him you gave her permission to use your credit card. You have to fix her relationship before the ceremony starts. I stared at the two of them, marveling at the sheer psychological gymnastics they were performing. They were standing in my home, demanding I fund their bankrupt business and demanding I lie to a billionaire groom to cover up a felony theft. They genuinely believed that screaming about familial duty would automatically force me into submission. You want me to commit fraud to save a thief? I asked, my tone completely flat. And you want me to liquidate my corporate assets to save a terrible businessman? That is your grand solution to this crisis. William slammed his fist down on the marble counter. Do not talk down to me, he roared. I am your father. I demand some respect. I need $5 million wired into my primary holding account by noon today to stop the foreclosure proceedings. $5 million is nothing to you, Tessa. It is pocket change for a chief executive officer. You will transfer the funds, and you will call Harrison to clear Chelsea's name. You are going to do this because I am ordering you to do it. The arrogance was truly breathtaking. William was completely bankrupt, facing total financial ruin, and yet he still tried to bark orders like a dictator. He thought his booming voice and aggressive posture would trigger my old childhood trauma, forcing me to instantly comply. He thought I was still the scared teenager he could manipulate with guilt and intimidation. I looked at William and Catherine, seeing the sweat beading on my father's forehead and the greedy hunger shining in my stepmother's eyes. They were not a family, they were parasites looking for a new host. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into the deep pocket of my cashmere trousers and pulled out my highly encrypted corporate smartphone. I placed the sleek black device gently onto the marble counter right next to my espresso cup. William, you seem to be operating under a massive psychological delusion, I stated, keeping my tone entirely conversational. You walked into my home, a home you did not even know existed until an hour ago, and demanded $5 million. You demanded it as if you were ordering a cheap meal at a fast food drive-thru. Let me make this crystal clear so your failing real estate brain can actually process the information. I am not giving you $5 million. I am not giving you $5,000. I am not giving you a single solitary cent. William's face contorted into an ugly mask of rage. But you have to. We are family. We share genetics, William. That is a biological accident, not a binding financial contract, I replied smoothly. You severed our family ties 10 years ago when you changed the locks on the front door. You cannot suddenly claim parental rights just because your bank accounts are frozen and your fraudulent business practices have finally caught up with you. Your financial ruin is the direct consequence of your own sheer incompetence. It is not my responsibility to clean up your spectacular mess. Catherine lunged forward, slapping her manicured hands flat on the marble island. Fine, she shrieked, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. Keep your greedy money. But you still have to call Harrison. You have to fix Chelsea's wedding immediately. If Chelsea marries him, Jonathan Maxwell will have to bail us out eventually to save his own grandchildren. You have to tell Harrison the credit card was just a tiny misunderstanding. I looked at Catherine with absolute clinical detachment. You want me to call a good, honest man and lie to him so your sociopathic daughter can trap him in a fraudulent marriage, I asked. You want me to help Chelsea secure her gold-digging payday. Catherine nodded vigorously, completely missing the utter disgust in my voice. Yes, exactly, Catherine pleaded, leaning closer. Just tell him you gave her the card voluntarily. It is a simple white lie, Tessa. It hurts no one. I tapped the screen of my smartphone. I entered my secure passcode and opened my encrypted audio files. I am afraid that is completely impossible, Catherine, I said. You see, Chelsea did not just steal $18,000 from me. She actively engaged in felony extortion and premeditated blackmail. And I am a meticulously organized record keeper. I pressed play on the first audio file and turned the volume to the maximum setting. The crisp, clear sound of Chelsea's arrogant voice instantly filled my massive living room. The recording transported us directly back to the Aspen penthouse. Oh, please stop being so utterly dramatic, Tessa Chelsea's recorded voice sneered through the speakers. It is not grand theft. It is collecting a long overdue debt. Dad specifically told me that you owed us for ruining our lives with your depressing energy. William and Catherine froze completely. Their eyes widened in sheer terror as they listened to their golden child confess to a felony right out of her own mouth. The recording continued playing Chelsea's vicious blackmail threat. Because if you even try to dispute those charges, I will destroy you, her voice hissed, filling the quiet penthouse with pure venom. If you call the bank or the police, I will call Harrison immediately. I will cry hysterically and tell him that you stole my engagement ring. I will tell him you are a jealous, psychotic spinster who is deeply obsessed with ruining my wedding. I paused the playback and looked up at my stepmother. Catherine looked as though all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of the room. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She realized instantly that Chelsea's innocent victim mask was completely destroyed. The audio proof was undeniably real and entirely damning. But I was not finished yet. I swiped down to a second audio file. Let us take a quick trip down memory lane. William thus suggested, tapping the screen again. Let us revisit the hospital emergency room from 6 months ago. Let us remember exactly how you treat the people you now expect to bail you out of bankruptcy. The audio from the trauma ward began to play. Catherine's cruel, vicious insults echoed off my high ceilings. You are 33 years old, working graveyard shifts in a disgusting hospital. You smell like iodine and cheap soap. You live in a tiny, depressing apartment. You have absolutely no ambition. Then came the unmistakable sound of boiling coffee splashing across my desk, followed by Catherine's malicious laughter. "Good luck cleaning up that mess, nurse." I stopped the recording and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The silence in the penthouse was absolutely suffocating. William and Catherine looked completely shattered. The arrogant, booming father and the condescending, snobby stepmother were totally gone. They were just two broke, terrified parasites realizing they had aggressively bullied the only person on earth who could save them. "I kept those recordings perfectly safe," I explained, walking around the kitchen island to face them directly. "I kept them as a reminder. Every single time I felt a brief passing moment of sympathy for you, I listened to those files. They reminded me exactly who you are. They reminded me that any mercy I showed you would be instantly weaponized and used against me." "Tessa, please," William croaked, his voice barely a whisper. His shoulders slumped forward in total defeat. He looked like a hollow, empty shell of a man. "We were wrong. We were so incredibly wrong about everything. Just give us a loan. We will sign any contract you want. We will pay any interest rate. If you do not help us, we will lose the house. We will lose the cars. We will have absolutely nothing left. Then you will finally know exactly what it feels like to be me at 16 years old." I replied, my voice as cold as ice. "You will finally experience the exact same crushing poverty you forced me into while you took Chelsea on luxury vacations. Consider it a long overdue lesson in building character." I walked over to the security panel mounted on the wall next to my private elevator. I pressed the intercom button connecting directly to the armed concierge desk in the lobby. "Security." I spoke clearly into the microphone. "I have 2 unauthorized trespassers in the penthouse. Please send an escort unit up immediately to remove them from the premises." Catherine let out a loud, gut-wrenching sob. She fell to her knees right on my imported hardwood floor, ruining her expensive designer skirt. She reached out, trying to grab the hem of my cashmere pants. "Tessa, please," she begged, weeping hysterically. "You cannot do this. We will be homeless. You cannot let your own family end up on the street." I took a swift step back, avoiding her grasping hands entirely. I looked down at her pathetic, groveling form with absolute zero pity. "My family is not in this room, Catherine. The only things in this room are a billionaire chief executive officer and 2 trespassers who are about to be forcibly removed by building security." The heavy steel doors of the private elevator slid open with a soft chime. 2 large armed security guards stepped into my foyer. They immediately assessed the situation and moved toward William and Catherine with strict professional authority. "Escort them out of the building," I commanded, turning my back on them completely. "If they ever attempt to bypass the lobby security again or step foot on this property, call the police and press charges for criminal trespassing." William did not fight back. He allowed the security guard to grab his arm and lead him toward the elevator. His spirit was completely broken. Catherine continued to sob loudly, dragging her feet as the second guard pulled her up from the floor. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the sprawling city skyline. I listened to the elevator doors slide shut, cutting off Catherine's hysterical crying instantly. The absolute peace returned to my sanctuary. They were gone. They were heading straight back to their collapsing house of cards, leaving me completely untouched by their ruin. While I was standing by my penthouse windows, enjoying the absolute silence of my sanctuary, a completely different reality was crashing down across the city. I was not inside the luxurious bridal suite at the Grand Marquis Hotel, but Harrison would later recount every single glorious detail of Chelsea's spectacular downfall to me with absolute crystal clarity. Harrison was sitting alone in his private dressing room. He was already fully dressed in his custom-tailored black tuxedo, but he was not getting ready to walk down the aisle. He was staring at the crumpled piece of paper resting in the palm of his hand. It was the $18,000 Aspen credit card receipt I had dropped on Chelsea's porcelain dinner plate the night before. Harrison was a genuinely good man, but he was absolutely not a fool. He had spent the entire morning bypassing the frantic wedding planners and placing a direct phone call to his father's elite corporate security team. He demanded a full comprehensive background check on his future bride and her entire family. The security team delivered the brutal truth within a single hour. They verified the credit card belonged exclusively to me. They confirmed Chelsea had fraudulently signed for the luxury spa treatments and the designer handbags. Furthermore, they uncovered the massive mountain of hidden debt Chelsea had accumulated over the years. They exposed the predatory loans William and Catherine had taken out just to fund this extravagant wedding charade. Harrison realized he had spent the last 12 months engaged to a complete mirage. He folded the receipt and stood up. He walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the bridal suite. His mind was replaying every single toxic lie Chelsea had fed him. She had told him she came from old money. She had told him I was just a bitter broke nurse who constantly begged her parents for financial handouts. She had manipulated his kind nature to secure a billionaire lifestyle. He pushed open the heavy wooden double doors of the bridal suite without knocking. Chelsea was standing in the center of the room wearing her massive custom white lace wedding gown. The room was decorated with expensive white roses and silk draping, but the atmosphere was entirely suffocating. William and Catherine had not yet returned from my penthouse. Chelsea was completely alone with her spiraling panic. When she saw Harrison walk through the doors, her face instantly shifted into her highly practiced innocent victim mask. "Harrison, honey," she cried, rushing toward him with her arms extended. "Thank goodness you are here. Last night was just a terrible nightmare. Tessa is a complete psychopath. She forged that receipt to frame me. We need to call building security and have her permanently barred from the venue before the ceremony starts." Harrison did not open his arms to hold her. He stood perfectly still, looking at her as if she were a total stranger. He held up the crumpled receipt. "Explain this, Chelsea," he demanded, his voice completely devoid of its usual warmth. "Explain how my future wife committed $18,000 worth of felony credit card fraud against the very woman who physically saved my mother's life." Chelsea froze in her tracks. She stared at the receipt, her eyes darting wildly around the room as she searched her empty brain for a plausible lie. "Harrison, it is not what it looks like," she stammered, her voice shaking. "Tessa gave me that platinum card. She let me use it for the bachelorette party, and then she completely turned on me because she is insanely jealous of our perfect relationship." Harrison shook his head slowly. The absolute disappointment in his eyes was devastating. "Stop lying to me, Chelsea," he said quietly. "I had the Maxwell corporate security team run a full financial background check on you this morning. I know about your hidden credit card debt. I know about the predatory loans your parents took out just to pay for these white roses. You told me your family was incredibly successful. You told me Tessa was a miserable failure who ruined your childhood. You lied to my face every single day for an entire year." Chelsea realized the innocent victim routine was completely dead. The walls were rapidly closing in on her. The billionaire lifestyle she had ruthlessly plotted and schemed to secure was slipping right through her manicured fingers. Instead of showing genuine remorse or begging for his forgiveness, her massive narcissistic ego violently took over. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into a snarl of pure, unadulterated rage. The sweet, charitable woman Harrison thought he loved evaporated into thin air. "Fine," Chelsea screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the expensive hotel walls. "You want the absolute truth, Harrison. The truth is that I deserve that money. I deserve every single penny of it. Do you have any idea how incredibly exhausting it has been pretending to care about your boring, pathetic little life for the past 12 months? Do you know how hard I had to work to act like I actually enjoyed listening to your depressing stories about saving the environment and doing charity work?" Harrison stared at her in horrific shock. She paced across the room, her heavy wedding dress rustling violently against the thick carpet. She grabbed a crystal vase full of white roses and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, sending water and glass flying everywhere. "I am beautiful," she shouted, gesturing wildly to herself. "I am absolutely flawless. I was bred for high society. I was supposed to marry into unlimited wealth. My parents invested our entire lives into trapping you and your ridiculous family. That nurse stepsister of mine is a disgusting, miserable troll who got extremely lucky with a medical patent. She owes me that $18,000 for ruining my childhood by simply existing in my house." She marched right up to Harrison, poking her manicured finger hard into his chest. "You are going to walk down that aisle, Harrison," she commanded, her voice dropping to a toxic hiss. "You are going to put a diamond ring on my finger and you are going to smile for the cameras. Because if you do not, your father will completely ruin my family and I will be left with absolutely nothing. You owe me this lifestyle. I earned it by putting up with you." Harrison looked down at the finger pressing into his chest. He slowly reached up and pushed her hand away, as if she were carrying a highly infectious disease. He looked her straight in the eyes, seeing the greedy, desperate monster hiding beneath the white lace. "I do not owe you anything," he said, his voice dropping to a low, steady whisper. "You are the most repulsive human being I have ever had the profound misfortune of meeting. You are completely empty, Chelsea. You have absolutely no soul." Harrison did not wait for her to respond. He turned his back on the shattered vase and the screaming bride walking out of the bridal suite without a single backward glance. The heavy wooden doors shut firmly behind him, leaving Chelsea completely alone with the horrifying reality of her exposed nature. But Chelsea was a master of self-delusion. She truly believed that wealthy people cared more about public image than personal integrity. She assumed Harrison would never dare to cause a massive scandal in front of 200 elite guests and global business partners. She wiped her face, applied a fresh layer of expensive powder to hide her blotchy skin, and adjusted her white lace veil. She was going to walk down that aisle and force his hand. She was convinced that once they were standing in front of the officiant, the pressure of the audience would compel him to say "I do." Downstairs, the grand cathedral hall of the venue was packed with 200 high society guests. The string quartet began playing a classical symphony, filling the cavernous space with elegant music. In the front row, William and Catherine sat rigidly in their seats. They had rushed back from my penthouse completely defeated, but desperately clinging to the microscopic hope that the wedding would still happen. They needed this marriage to finalize so they could legally tether themselves to the Maxwell fortune. William was sweating profusely through his tailored suit. Catherine was gripping her designer clutch purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Across the aisle, Jonathan Maxwell sat perfectly still. He did not look at William or Catherine. He stared straight ahead, waiting for his son to make the final move. The massive cathedral doors swung open. The guests stood up, turning to watch the bride make her grand entrance. Chelsea walked down the long, white-carpeted aisle, gripping a bouquet of imported white orchids. She wore a flawless, bright smile, projecting the absolute image of a pure, innocent bride stepping into her fairy tale ending. She glided past the rows of venture capitalists and real estate moguls basking in the attention. She looked at Harrison standing at the altar, and her smile widened into a smug, triumphant smirk. She honestly thought she had won. She thought she had successfully called his bluff. Harrison stood at the altar, his posture perfectly straight and his hands clasped behind his back. He did not smile as Chelsea approached. He did not offer his arm to help her up the steps. He simply watched her arrive with an expression of profound clinical detachment. Chelsea took her place beside him, adjusting her massive train to ensure it draped perfectly over the steps. She looked out at the sea of wealthy guests fully ready to claim her billionaire throne. The officiant smiled warmly at the crowd and began the traditional ceremony. He spoke about love, commitment, and building a future together. He spoke about honesty and trust. Every single word was a blazing irony, considering the absolute fraud standing at the altar. Chelsea maintained her perfect posture, batting her eyelashes and looking up at Harrison with manufactured devotion. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Then came the pivotal moment. The officiant turned to Harrison. He asked the question that was supposed to seal the golden ticket for William and Catherine. "Do you, Harrison, take Chelsea to be your lawfully wedded wife to have and to hold from this day forward?" The entire cathedral fell completely silent, waiting for the groom to say his vows. Chelsea leaned forward slightly, her eyes gleaming with greedy anticipation. William and Catherine held their breath in the front row, praying for their financial salvation to be formalized. Harrison looked at Chelsea. He looked at her expensive white dress, her sparkling diamond necklace, and the fake innocent smile plastered across her face. Then he slowly shook his head. "No," Harrison said. His voice was incredibly calm, but it carried perfectly through the silent cathedral. I absolutely do not. The collective gasp from 200 elite guests sucked all the oxygen out of the massive room. Chelsea froze completely, her fake smile shattering into a million pieces. The officiant blinked in confusion, lowering his ceremonial book. "Harrison, please," Chelsea whispered frantically, trying to grab his hand. "Do not do this right now. People are watching." Harrison stepped away, avoiding her touch entirely. He turned away from the officiant and faced the 200 shocked guests. He did not lower his voice. He made sure every single person in the room heard exactly what he had to say. "I apologize to everyone who traveled to be here today," Harrison announced, projecting his voice clearly across the rows of wealthy attendees. "But there will be no wedding today, or ever. The woman standing next to me is a complete fraud. She and her parents have spent the last 12 months lying to my family and everyone in this room. They portray themselves as a successful high society family, but they are entirely bankrupt. They are drowning in massive hidden debt and predatory loans. They viewed this marriage purely as a hostile corporate takeover designed to extract a financial bailout from my father." William jumped up from his seat in the front row, his face purple with panic. "Harrison, please stop talking," William begged, waving his hands desperately. "This is a private family matter." "There is nothing private about grand theft," Harrison countered, staring down at my biological father with utter disgust. "Last night, I discovered that my beautiful bride committed $18,000 worth of felony credit card fraud against her own stepsister. She stole the money to buy luxury handbags and spa treatments so she could pretend to fit in with my social circle. She then attempted to blackmail her stepsister to cover up the crime." The crowd erupted into chaotic murmurs. Wealthy investors whispered to their spouses, pointing openly at Chelsea, who was now trembling violently at the altar. Catherine buried her face in her hands, sobbing loudly as her entire fake social standing was publicly incinerated. "But the financial fraud is not even the worst part," Harrison continued, cutting through the noise with righteous anger. "Chelsea and her parents have spent years relentlessly abusing the very woman they stole from. They ruthlessly bullied, mocked, and discarded a woman who works tirelessly to save human lives. They tortured the exact trauma nurse who physically saved my own mother's life a year ago. They are toxic, abusive parasites, and I would rather die alone than legally bind myself to this repulsive family." Chelsea let out a horrifying shriek of pure rage. She stomped her foot on the altar steps, losing her balance slightly under the weight of her massive gown. "You cannot do this to me," she screamed, her voice cracking hysterically. "I gave you a year of my life. I deserve this lifestyle. You owe me." Harrison did not even acknowledge her screaming tantrum. He looked directly at his father, Jonathan, who was watching the scene with a proud, approving nod. Harrison stepped down from the altar, bypassing the weeping bride entirely. He walked straight down the center aisle of the cathedral, moving with long, confident strides. He did not look left or right. He did not stop to speak to anyone. He marched directly toward the heavy wooden exit doors. Chelsea collapsed onto the altar steps, sobbing uncontrollably as her entire billionaire fantasy dissolved into dust. William and Catherine sat paralyzed in the front row, utterly destroyed, as the wealthy guests openly glared at them with supreme contempt. Harrison pushed open the massive double doors and walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight, leaving the fraudulent bride and her bankrupt parents trapped in the catastrophic wreckage of their own making.